What if Luffy had been secretly op this entire time? Picture this. At 13, watching Sabo die triggers something massive in Luffy, full mastery of all three Haki types. For years, he's been pretending to barely win fights while actually holding back insane power. Then Marineford happens, and everyone discovers their lucky rookie can actually go toe-to-toe with admirals. This story flips everything on its head. No more plot armor saves or last-minute power-ups, just Luffy finally dropping the act and showing the world what 12 years of hidden training looks like. Spoiler alert. Admiral Haki learns the hard way that some people are just built different. If you're ready for a completely different take on One Piece where actions have real consequences, hit that like button and let's jump in. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung thick in the air above Marineford. Thousands of Marines and pirates clashed across the frozen bay, their screams and battle cries creating a symphony of war that would echo through history. But for Monkey D. Luffy, standing on a chunk of ice with his crew scattered around the battlefield, the world had gone completely silent. His eyes were locked on the execution platform. Ace knelt there between two executioners, sea-stone shackles digging into his wrists, that stupid grin still plastered on his face even as death loomed overhead. The same grin he'd worn when they were kids, when he'd steal food from Dadden's kitchen and act like he didn't care if he got caught. "Luffy," Ivankov's voice cut through his trance. "What are you doing?" "We need to move," but Luffy couldn't move. His observation Haki was acting up again, showing him flashes of what might happen. Usually he could control it, keep it buried deep where no one would notice. He'd gotten good at that over the years, hiding what he could really do, letting his crew think he was just lucky or incredibly stubborn. The vision hit him like a sledgehammer. Ace falling forward, a fist of molten lava punching through his chest, blood splattering across the platform, those dark eyes going wide with shock then empty. "Thank you for loving me," whispered into the chaos before everything went dark. "No," the word escaped his lips before he could stop it. "Luffy," Jinbei looked at him with concern. "What's wrong?" He blinked hard, shaking off the vision. Around him, his Nakama were watching with worry etched on their faces. Zoro's hand rested on his swords, ready for whatever came next. Sanji had that look he got when someone threatened their family. Chopper was already reaching for medical supplies, because somehow he always knew when Luffy was about to do something insane. They trusted him. They followed him into hell itself because they believed in him, never knowing that he'd been holding back, never using even half of what he was capable of. He told himself it was to protect them, to let them grow strong on their own. But sitting here, watching Ace about to die, he knew the truth. He was scared of what he might become if he stopped holding back. Scared of the monster that lived inside him, the one that had awakened that terrible day when he was 13. The memory came rushing back whether he wanted it or not. Gray Terminal was burning. Again. Luffy had been searching for Sabo everywhere, his 13-year-old legs pumping as he raced through the smoke and flames. Ace was beside him, shouting Sabo's name until his voice cracked. "There," Ace pointed toward the harbor. That ship, and there was Sabo, standing on the deck of a small boat, looking back at them with tears streaming down his face. He was saying something, but the wind carried his words away. Then the World Noble's ship appeared, massive and gleaming white like a floating palace. The cannon fired. Most people would have seen the explosion. Luffy saw everything. His observation Haki, still wild and untrained, showed him every horrible detail in perfect clarity. The cannonball tearing through Sabo's tiny boat, the wood splintering, Sabo's small body thrown into the water, blood pooling around him as he sank beneath the waves. Something inside Luffy broke. The scream that tore from his throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a wounded animal, of rage and grief and helplessness all rolled into one. But it was more than just sound. Power erupted from him in waves, Conqueror's Haki, raw and uncontrolled, knocking out everyone within 100 yards. Marines, pirates, nobles, civilians, all of them dropped like stones. But that wasn't all. His skin turned black, harder than steel. Armament Haki coating his entire body without him even knowing what it was. His fists clenched so tight that his nails drew blood, and when he punched the ground in frustration, the earth cracked and split for 20 feet in every direction. And through it all he could see everything. Every person for miles around, their emotions, their intentions, their life force flickering like candles in the wind. Observation Haki showed him the World Noble laughing on his ship, the Marines scrambling to figure out what had happened, Ace standing frozen in shock at what his little brother had become. When the power finally faded, Luffy collapsed. The last thing he remembered was Ace catching him, shouting for help, promising everything would be okay, but nothing was okay after that. How could it be when he'd learned that he had the power to save people and had been too weak, too stupid, too late to use it? Luffy, Zoro's voice was quiet, concerned. Your fists are bleeding. He looked down. His nails had dug crescents into his palms, just like that day 12 years ago. Blood dripped onto the ice below his feet. I'm fine, he lied, but he wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine since Sabo died, since he'd learned what real power felt like, and decided to bury it so deep that even he sometimes forgot it was there. He'd spent years telling himself he was protecting his crew by holding back, that they needed to grow strong without relying on him. Really, he'd just been a coward. The execution was starting. Sengoku stepped forward, his voice booming across the battlefield as he began to speak about Ace's crimes, his heritage, why he had to die. Standard marine propaganda, the kind of thing that usually made Luffy's blood boil. Today it just made him tired. We have to go, he said quietly. We have to save him. That's what we're here for, Ivankov said, relief clear in their voice. But we need a plan, the admirals are. No, Luffy's voice was firm. No plans, no strategies, no holding back. He stood up, and something in his posture made everyone around him take a step back. Even Zoro looked uneasy. Luffy, Sanji started, what are you? I've been lying to you. The words came out in a rush. All of you, for years, about what I can do, about how strong I really am, I thought. I thought I was protecting you by letting you fight your own battles, but Ace is going to die and I can't, his voice cracked. I can't lose another brother. The silence stretched between them. His crew, his family, staring at him like they'd never seen him before. Maybe they hadn't. How strong? Zoro asked finally. Luffy looked at him, then at each of his nakama in turn. Sanji with his cigarette dangling from shocked lips. Chopper clutching his medical bag. Usopp pale but determined. Robin watching him with that calculating look she got when pieces of a puzzle started falling into place. Strong enough, he said simply. Then he closed his eyes and let just a fraction of his real power leak out. The air around them began to thrum with energy. Not enough to knock anyone out, not enough to cause a scene, but enough that every strong fighter on the battlefield would feel it. Enough that they'd know something had changed. When Luffy opened his eyes again, they held flecks of gold that hadn't been there before, the mark of a conqueror finally allowing itself to be seen. Stay here, he told his crew. Keep yourselves safe, I'm going to get our brother back. And for the first time in 12 years, Monkey D. Luffy stopped pretending to be weak. The war was about to change. The journey to Marineford hadn't been like the others. Usually when Luffy set his mind on something, he charged ahead without looking back, dragging his crew into whatever chaos awaited them. This time felt different. This time he'd been careful. Strategic even though he'd never admit it out loud. It started on Amazon Lily. 3 days earlier, the Kuja pirates' ship cut through the calm belt like a knife through silk, but Luffy barely noticed the scenery. He sat cross-legged on the deck, eyes closed, practicing the meditation techniques he'd taught himself years ago. Control was everything. Without it, his power would leak out in ways that would scare people or get them killed. Luffy, Hancock's voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. Are you all right? You seem different. He opened his eyes to find her studying him with that intense look she got sometimes. The same look she'd had when she first showed him her back, when she'd trusted him with her deepest shame. Just thinking about Ace, he said, which was true enough. She didn't look convinced. Yesterday when those Sea Kings attacked, Luffy's jaw tightened. He'd been careless. One of the massive creatures had gotten too close to the ship, jaws wide enough to swallow them whole. Instead of stretching his arms to punch it away like he normally would, his body had moved on instinct. Black skin, hardened with armament Haki, his fist coated in something darker and more dangerous. The Sea King hadn't just been knocked back, his punch had caved in its skull, killing it instantly. Hancock had been watching. That wasn't normal armament Haki, she said quietly. I've seen strong fighters before, Luffy, what you did. That was something else. He could lie, make up some excuse about getting lucky or catching it off guard. That's what he'd been doing for years, deflecting questions about his real strength with jokes or distractions. But looking at her now, seeing the genuine worry in her eyes, he found he couldn't do it anymore. Yeah, he said finally. It was. How long? Her voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been hiding this? Since I was 13. The admission hung between them like a live wire. Hancock's eyes widened, and he could practically see her mind working, putting together pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know she'd been solving. The newspapers, she said slowly, all those battles you barely won, all those times you almost died, you were holding back, not always. Luffy picked at the wood of the deck, suddenly finding it hard to meet her eyes. Sometimes I had to use a little more than I let on, but yeah, most of the time. Why? The question he'd been dreading. How could he explain the weight of it, the constant fear that if he let his real power out, he'd become something his friends wouldn't recognize? How could he tell her about the nightmares, the dreams where he saw himself standing over the bodies of his nakama because he'd been too strong, too reckless, too much like the monsters they'd spent their lives fighting? Because I was scared, he said instead. Hancock was quiet for a long moment, then unexpectedly she smiled. You're an idiot, she said, but there was no heat in it. Do you really think your crew would care how strong you are? They follow you because of who you are, not what you can do. But what if? No what ifs. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his palm. They chose you, Luffy. All of you, including the parts you think are too dangerous to show them. He wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. The infiltration of Impel down had been almost too easy. Luffy moved through the prison levels like he'd been there before. His observation Haki mapping out guard positions, trap locations, and prisoner cells with perfect accuracy. He could feel Ace somewhere far below, his life force weak but still burning, still fighting. Incredible, Ivankov murmured as they slipped past another group of guards. I've never seen anyone navigate this place so efficiently. It's like you can see through walls. Something like that, Luffy muttered, his attention focused on a conversation happening 3 floors down. Magellan was talking to someone about execution schedules, about moving Ace ahead of the original timeline. They were running out of time. Iva-chan, he said, stopping suddenly, I need you to get everyone to the exit. Now. What? But we haven't found your brother yet. I know where he is. Luffy's voice was flat, businesslike in a way that made Ivankov's eyebrows shoot up. Level 6, but if I go down there the way I need to, things are going to get messy. Really messy. Luffy boy, what are you talking about? Instead of answering, Luffy pressed his hand against the wall. His observation Haki stretched out like invisible fingers, mapping the entire prison in perfect detail. He could feel every guard, every prisoner, every trap and security measure between here and Ace's cell. He could also feel something else. A presence moving through level 4, familiar and desperate and about to do something incredibly stupid. Bon-chan, he breathed. What about Bentham? Ivankov asked, but Luffy was already moving. He found his friend because that's what Bon Clay was, no matter what anyone said, surrounded by wolves in level 5. The Akama was putting up a good fight, but he was outnumbered 20-1 and bleeding from a dozen wounds. For my queen, Bon Clay screamed, spinning into another ballet-style kick. For Luffy-chan's dream, something inside Luffy's chest cracked. This man, this crazy, loyal, beautiful disaster of a person was about to die for him. Was ready to die for him without question, without hesitation, because that's what friends did. That's what family did. The wolves closed in for the kill, and Luffy stopped holding back. The Conqueror's Haki hit the room like a physical force. Not wild and uncontrolled like it had been when he was 13, but focused, precise, surgical. Every wolf in the room dropped instantly, their eyes rolling back as they collapsed to the stone floor. The sound of bodies hitting the ground echoed through the silence like thunder. Bon Clay stood in the center of it all, untouched, staring at the carnage with wide eyes. Luffy-chan, his voice was small, uncertain. Was that? Did you do that? Luffy stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time in years, he let his friend see him. Really see him. The gold flecks in his eyes were more pronounced now, the aura of barely contained power crackling around him like electricity. Yeah, he said quietly, I did. Bon Clay looked at him for a long moment, taking in the changes, the power, the weight of years of hidden strength. Then, impossibly, he grinned. Well, it's about bloody time, he said cheerfully. I was wondering when you'd stop pretending to be normal. Despite everything, Luffy found himself smiling back. Come on, he said, offering his hand to his friend. Let's get out of here. What about Ace-chan? Don't worry, Luffy's smile turned sharp, predatory. I'm going to get him back, all of him. And anyone who tries to stop me is going to learn what I can really do. As they made their way toward the exit, Bon Clay couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. The boy who had saved him in Alabasta, who had charged into Enai's lobby for a single crew member, who had declared war on the world government itself, that boy was still there. But underneath, something else was stirring. Something older, stronger, and far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. Luffy-chan, he said quietly as they climbed toward level 4, promise me something. What? When this is all over, when we've saved Ace-chan and beaten all the bad guys. Promise me you'll still be you, Not some monster wearing your face, not some king who's forgotten what it means to be human. Just you. Luffy was quiet for so long that Bon Clay thought he wouldn't answer. Then just as they reached the stairwell, he spoke. "I promise," he said, "but Ben-chan, yeah, I think it's too late to pretend I'm not a monster. I've been one all along. I just got really good at hiding it." The words hung between them as they climbed, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to face. Behind them, the wolves began to wake up, confused and disoriented but alive. Luffy had been careful not to use too much power, not to cause permanent damage. But the restraint was getting harder to maintain. Every minute that passed, every second that Ace remained in chains, made it more difficult to remember why he'd been holding back in the first place. By the time they reached the surface, by the time they'd reunited with Ivankov and the other escapees, by the time they were sailing toward Marineford with grim determination etched on every face, Luffy had made a decision. He was done hiding, done pretending to be weaker than he was, done letting the people he loved suffer because he was too afraid of his own power to use it. The war was coming, and for the first time in 12 years, Monkey D. Luffy was going to fight it with everything he had. Heaven help anyone who got in his way. The Bay of Marineford stretched out before them like an arena designed by the gods themselves. Massive walls of ice rose from the frozen waters, creating platforms and barriers that would shape the battlefield to come. 50 warships lined the crescent-shaped harbor, their cannons trained on the center of the bay where Whitebeard would make his entrance. Where he was supposed to make his entrance anyway. "Something's wrong," Luffy said quietly, his eyes scanning the empty water. Around him, the other escapees from Impel down were cheering and shouting about the coming battle, but their voices seemed to fade into background noise. "What do you mean wrong?" Ivankov asked, following his gaze. "The execution isn't supposed to start for another hour. Whitebeard will come." "No, he's already here." The words had barely left his mouth when the water in the center of the bay began to bubble and churn. The Marines on the walls started shouting, pointing at the disturbance, but Luffy had seen it coming minutes ago. His observation Haki had picked up the massive presence rising from the depths, along with the dozen smaller but still formidable auras surrounding it. The Moby Dick burst from the water like a breaching whale, its massive hull gleaming in the afternoon sun. Water cascaded from its sides as the legendary ship settled onto the surface, followed immediately by its escort vessels rising from the depths around it. "Coded ships," Jinbei breathed. He came from underwater, brilliant. But Luffy wasn't watching the ships. He was watching the man standing at the bow of the Moby Dick, Bicento planted firmly on the deck, white coat billowing in the wind. Even from this distance, even with thousands of Marines between them, Edward Newgate's presence was overwhelming. And he was staring right at Luffy. "Gyurarara," Whitebeard's laugh boomed across the battlefield, carried by his devil fruit power until it seemed to echo from every surface. So many familiar faces, and some new ones too. His eyes locked onto Luffy's for just a moment, and in that instant something passed between them, recognition, acknowledgement. The silent communication between two wielders of Conqueror's Haki, even though neither was actively using it. Whitebeard knew. Somehow he knew. "My foolish son," the Emperor continued, his voice carrying easily across the water. "If you wanted to take a ride on my ship, you should have just asked." Ace lifted his head on the execution platform, and even from this distance, Luffy could see the pain in his brother's eyes. Not physical pain, though the sea-stone shackles were clearly taking their toll, but emotional agony. The weight of knowing that all these people, all these lives, were here because of him. "Old man," Ace called back, his voice cracking. "Why did you come? I told everyone not to follow me. What kind of father would I be if I let my son die alone?" Whitebeard's grip tightened on his weapon. "I said I'd make you a man, didn't I? That means seeing you through to the end." The exchange was playing out exactly as Luffy remembered from the newspapers, from the stories told afterward. But this time, he wasn't just watching. This time, his observation Haki was spreading out across the entire battlefield, mapping positions, intentions, the ebb and flow of battle plans being formed on both sides. The admirals were in position. Akai knew at the center, his magma already beginning to smoke with anticipation. Kizaru lounging against a pillar, but Luffy could sense the coiled energy beneath his casual posture. Aokiji standing like a statue, ice crystals forming in the air around him. Behind them, the warlords, Mihawk studying the battlefield with predatory interest. Doflamingo grinning like this was all a game. Moriah looking bored but calculating, and Hancock was looking at him. Even across the chaos of the battlefield, even with thousands of people between them, she'd found him in the crowd. Her eyes held a question, one he'd been avoiding since Amazon Lily. "Are you ready for this?" He gave her the smallest nod. "Luffy," Ivankov said urgently, "the Marines are moving. If we're going to make our move, not yet." His voice was calm, controlled. "Let them think they know what's coming." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, Luffy closed his eyes and let his observation Haki expand even further. It was a risk. Using this much power might give away his position, but he needed to see everything. Every troop movement, every strategic positioning, every plan forming in the minds of the Marine commanders. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Marines weren't just planning to execute Ace. They were planning to slaughter everyone who came to save him. The bay was a trap, designed to funnel the pirates into a killing field where the admirals could pick them apart. Worse, they had backup plans, contingencies, ways to ensure that even if some pirates escaped, the message would be clear: challenge the world government and everyone you care about dies. "They're not planning to let anyone leave," he said quietly. "What?" Jinbei leaned closer, concern etched on his features. "The Marines, this isn't just about Ace anymore. They want to end the great pirate age today in front of the whole world. They're going to try to kill everyone." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not just Ace was in danger, everyone. Whitebeard, his crew, all the escaped prisoners, anyone who'd come here thinking they were just saving one person. The Marines were planning a massacre. "How can you possibly know that?" Ivankov demanded. Luffy opened his eyes, and for the first time, he let a hint of his real power leak through. Just enough that the people around him could feel it, could sense the depth of strength he'd been hiding. "Because I can hear them planning it," he said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the sounds of battle preparation seemed to fade as the escapees processed what he'd just said. "Observation Haki," Jinbei breathed. But to hear conversations at this distance, to sense intentions with that kind of clarity. "How long have you been able to do this?" "Long enough." Luffy's attention was already moving on, his enhanced senses tracking the movements of key players across the battlefield. "We need to warn them, all of them." "Warn who?" Ivankov asked. "And how? We're trapped in the middle of a war zone, the Phoenix." Before anyone could ask what he meant, Luffy was moving. Not running, not charging forward like he usually did, but moving with purpose and precision. His feet found perfect footing on the icy surfaces, his body flowing around obstacles like water. Years of hiding his true speed, of pretending to be clumsy and reckless, fell away like a discarded costume. He reached the front lines just as the first wave of Marine soldiers crashed into the Whitebeard pirates. Steel rang against steel, devil fruit powers lit up the battlefield, and the roar of combat filled the air. But Luffy moved through it all like he was dancing, never quite where the attacks landed, never slow enough to be caught. A Marine captain swung a massive sword at his head. Luffy ducked without looking, his observation Haki having seen the attack coming from 3 moves away. A group of soldiers tried to surround him with spears. He was already gone, having slipped between them before they'd finished forming up. "How is he moving like that?" someone shouted. "It's Straw Hat, stop him," but they couldn't stop him. How could they stop someone who could see their moves before they made them, who could read their intentions like an open book? Luffy flowed through the battlefield like smoke, untouchable, heading for his target. Marco the Phoenix was engaged in aerial combat with a Vice Admiral blue flames wreathing his transformed body as he dove and weaved through cannon fire. He was skilled, experienced, one of the strongest fighters in the New World. He also had no idea what was coming. "Marco," Luffy called out, his voice somehow carrying over the din of battle. The Phoenix turned mid-flight, surprise flickering across his features. Who was calling his name? How did they know him? His eyes locked onto the young pirate moving across the battlefield below, and something about the boy's posture, his presence, made Marco's instincts scream danger. This wasn't just some rookie. "You need to warn Pops," Luffy shouted up at him. "It's a trap, they're planning to kill everyone." "What?" Marco dove lower, curiosity overriding caution. "Who are you and how could you possibly?" The answer came not in words, but in a brief pulse of Conqueror's Haki. Just a flash, just enough to make Marco's eyes widen in recognition. The boy had the same presence as his captain, the same weight of absolute authority that marked a true king. "Straw Hat Luffy," Marco breathed. "But how are you?" "No time." Luffy was already moving again, heading for another key player. "Tell Pops the bay is a trap. They have something planned for when the walls come down." He vanished back into the crowd before Marco could respond, leaving the Phoenix staring after him in shock. A rookie pirate with a bounty barely worth mentioning, moving through a battlefield of Marine elites like it was a casual stroll. Displaying Conqueror's Haki like he'd been born to it, knowing things he shouldn't, seeing things he couldn't. Unless. No way, Marco muttered, banking toward the Moby Dick. Pops needs to hear about this. Meanwhile, Luffy had found his next target. Vista, the flower sword, was carving through a group of marine officers with elegant precision, his twin blades leaving trails of rose petals in the air. He was skilled enough to hold a conversation while fighting, which was exactly what Luffy needed. Vista, he called out, sliding under a sword swing meant for the division commander's head. Vista glanced down, surprised to find a young pirate fighting beside him. Do I know you? Straw Hat Luffy. He deflected a spear thrust with his bare hand, armament Haki turning his skin black for just an instant. I need you to get a message to your crew. A message, in the middle of a battle. Despite his words, Vista was intrigued. The boy was fighting with a skill that didn't match his reputation, and that brief display of Haki had been far more advanced than a rookie should possess. The Marines are planning something big, something that involves the walls around the bay. When they make their move, your crew needs to be ready to retreat. Retreat, Vista's expression darkened. We don't abandon family. You're not abandoning anyone. You're making sure there's someone left to save when the dust settles. Before Vista could respond, Luffy was gone again, having spotted his next target, but the seed was planted. The doubt, the question, the growing realization that something about this battle felt wrong. Across the battlefield, similar conversations were taking place. Luffy moved like a ghost through the combat, appearing beside key fighters just long enough to plant warnings, to share information, to slowly build a network of awareness among the pirate forces. Jazu, the Diamond Man, crushing Marines with casual swings of his crystalline fists. Aizo, the former samurai, picking off Marine snipers with deadly accuracy. Namor, the shark fishman, leading aquatic assaults against the Marine ships. One by one, Luffy found them all. One by one, he shared what his observation Haki had shown him. And one by one, they began to look at the young pirate with new eyes. This wasn't some lucky rookie stumbling through battles. This was a predator wearing a mask, and the mask was finally starting to slip. It was Whitebeard himself who finally called him out. Straw Hat, the Emperor's voice boomed across the battlefield, cutting through the chaos like a sword. Come here, boy. The fighting around the Moby Dick slowed as Marines and pirates alike turned to see what had caught Whitebeard's attention. Luffy stood in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by unconscious enemies. When had he knocked them out? How had no one seen him move, looking up at the legendary captain with steady eyes? You've been busy, Whitebeard observed, his gaze taking in the subtle changes in his crew's positioning, the way they'd begun to form defensive patterns without even realizing it. My son seemed to think you have something important to tell me. I do. Luffy's voice carried clearly across the water, though he wasn't shouting. They're planning to drop the walls, trap everyone in the bay, and finish us all at once. That's why they moved the execution up. They want this over fast, before anyone realizes what's happening. Murmurs rippled through both sides of the battlefield. How could this boy know such specific information? How could he be so certain? Whitebeard studied him for a long moment, and Luffy felt the weight of that legendary presence pressing against him. Not hostile, but testing, measuring, trying to understand what he was dealing with. And how, Whitebeard asked slowly, would a rookie pirate come by such detailed intelligence? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the battle had slowed to a near standstill as everyone waited for the answer. Even the Marines seemed curious, their weapons lowered as they strained to hear. Luffy looked up at the man who had been a father to his brother, who had sailed with the Pirate King, who had spent decades as one of the strongest people in the world. Then he made a decision that would change everything. He smiled, not his usual grin, bright and carefree and full of innocent joy. This was something else. Something older, sharper, touched with a weight that had nothing to do with his age. And he let his observation Haki expand. Not just to the battlefield this time, but beyond. To every Marine on every ship, every sniper in every tower, every officer in every command post. His awareness spread like ripples in a pond until he could sense the intentions and emotions of thousands of people simultaneously. The sensation was overwhelming. It always was when he used this much power. But for the first time in years, he didn't pull back. He didn't hide. He let everyone feel it, the depth of his awareness, the scope of his abilities, the sheer magnitude of what he'd been keeping buried. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Conversational, but somehow, impossibly, everyone heard it. Because I can hear them thinking about it, he said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. On the execution platform, Sengoku's eyes went wide with recognition and horror. He'd felt that pulse of observation. Haki had recognized its scope and precision. This wasn't some talented rookie, this was something else entirely. Impossible, the fleet admiral breathed. That level of observation. Haki. It should take decades to develop, but Whitebeard was smiling, a slow, understanding smile that spoke of recognition, of pieces falling into place. Gururara, he laughed softly. I wondered why Roger's hat chose you, boy. Now I think I'm beginning to understand. He planted his bicento firmly on the deck and leaned forward, studying Luffy with new interest. Tell me, Straw Hat, how long have you been hiding what you really are? The question cut straight to the heart of everything. 12 years of careful control, of measured responses, of pretending to be weaker than he was. 12 years of watching his friends struggle and fight, and nearly die while he held back, afraid of what he might become if he let himself be real. Too long, Luffy said finally. And with those words, the last of his restraints began to crumble. On the execution platform, Ace was staring down at him with wide eyes, finally understanding why his little brother had seemed so confident, so certain that everything would be okay. This wasn't the clumsy kid who used to fall out of trees and get stuck in walls. This was someone else entirely. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Someone who was about to change the world. The executioners raised their blades above Ace's head, and Sengoku began the final countdown. But instead of despair, instead of the frantic rush toward an impossible rescue that everyone had been expecting, there was only a strange sense of anticipation. As if the real battle was just about to begin. Luffy looked up at his brother, and for the first time in 12 years he let Ace see him, really see him. The gold flecks in his eyes were shining now, the aura of barely contained power crackling around him like lightning. Don't worry, Ace, he called out, his voice carrying easily across the battlefield. Big brother's here. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could swear he heard Sabo's voice, carried on the wind like a ghost's whisper. It's about time. The countdown had begun. 10. Sengoku's voice boomed across Marineford as the executioners raised their blades above Ace's head. Every person on the battlefield, Marine and pirate alike, turned toward the platform, watching the final moments of Port Gazdi. Ace play out in real time. 9. Whitebeard's hands tightened on his bicento, the air around him beginning to shimmer with barely contained earthquake power. His crew was already moving, pushing forward with desperate fury, but they were too far away. The walls of ice, the maze of marine defenses, there simply wasn't enough time. 8. Luffy stood in the center of it all, watching his brother about to die, and felt something inside his chest break open. Not snap, not crack, but unfold like a flower that had been compressed for too long. The careful control he'd maintained for 12 years, the measured restraint that had become second nature, all of it just let go. 7. Hey, he said quietly, and somehow his voice carried across the entire battlefield. Not shouted, not amplified by any devil fruit power, just spoken with the absolute authority of someone who expected to be heard. 6. The executioners hesitated. Just for a moment, just long enough to glance down at the young pirate standing alone among thousands of enemies. There was something in his posture, something in the way he held himself that made every instinct scream danger. 5. I said. Luffy's eyes began to glow, gold flecks expanding until they dominated his irises completely. Hey. 4. And then he let it out. The Conqueror's Haki hit the battlefield like a physical force, a wave of pure willpower that spread outward from Luffy's position in all directions. It wasn't the wild, uncontrolled burst from his childhood. This was focused, refined, surgical in its precision. He could have knocked out everyone within a mile radius. Instead, he chose his targets carefully. Every Marine below the rank of captain dropped instantly. Thousands of soldiers collapsed where they stood, their eyes rolling back as their minds simply shut down in the face of overwhelming royal presence. The executioners toppled backward, their blades clattering harmlessly to the platform. Even some of the vice admirals staggered, their knees buckling under the pressure. But it didn't stop there. The Conqueror's Haki kept expanding, washing over the entire bay like a tide. Ships' crews fell unconscious at their posts. Snipers tumbled from their towers. Cannon operators slumped over their weapons. In the span of 3 heartbeats, Luffy had eliminated nearly half the Marine forces without throwing a single punch. The silence that followed was deafening. What? Sengoku's voice was barely a whisper, his face pale with shock. What was that? On the Moby Dick, Whitebeard was laughing. Not his usual boisterous laughter, but something deeper, filled with recognition and approval. Gururara, I knew it. He slammed his bicento against the deck, his eyes shining with excitement. That presence, that overwhelming authority, you've got the same royal spirit as Roger himself, don't you, boy? Marco was staring at Luffy with something approaching awe. That range, that precision. I've never seen Conqueror's Haki used like that. It's like he could pick and choose exactly who to affect. Because he could, Whitebeard said, his grin widening. That's not just raw power, that's mastery. The kind that takes decades to develop. Tell me, Straw Hat, how old are you again? 17, Luffy called back, walking forward through the field of unconscious Marines like he was taking a casual stroll. But I've been practicing since I was 13. 13, Vista's voice cracked. You awakened Conqueror's Haki at 13. Had to. Luffy's expression darkened for a moment. Someone I cared about died and I wasn't strong enough to save them. Decided I'd never let that happen again. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the battlefield, those Marines still conscious were backing away from him, their weapons shaking in their hands. This wasn't just some rookie pirate with a big mouth. This was a monster wearing a 17-year-old's face. Interesting. The voice came from directly above, cold and emotionless. Luffy looked up to see Admiral Akainu standing on a pillar of hardened magma, his arms already transforming into molten rock. Sakazuki's expression was calculating, predatory, the look of a hunter who'd found prey worthy of his attention. Sakazuki, Sengoku warned, be careful, this isn't what we expected. Oh, I can see that. Akainu's magma began to drip from his fists, each drop hissing as it hit the ice below. A Conqueror's Haki user with that kind of range and control. No wonder the boy's been such a persistent thorn in our side. He leaped down from his perch, landing 20 feet away from Luffy with enough force to crack the ice beneath his feet. The temperature around them spiked immediately, steam rising from where his molten body met the frozen battlefield. Tell me, Straw Hat, Akainu said conversationally, how many Marines have died because we underestimated you? How many operations have failed because we thought you were just another lucky rookie? Luffy didn't answer. He was studying the Admiral with the same intensity Akainu was showing him, his enhanced observation Haki mapping out every detail of the man's posture, his emotional state, his attack patterns. What he saw made his jaw tighten. Akainu wasn't just angry about the unconscious Marines. He was furious about being made to look foolish, about having his carefully laid plans disrupted by someone he dismissed as beneath notice. And more than that, he was afraid. Not of Luffy specifically, but of what his existence represented. A new generation of pirates who might actually be capable of challenging the world government's absolute authority. You're scared, Luffy said quietly. What? You're scared that if people see me do this, if they realize the Marines can be beaten, they'll stop being afraid of you. Stop accepting that the world government has the right to decide who lives and dies. Akainu's expression darkened, magma beginning to bubble more violently around his fists. You think you understand justice, boy? You think your childish dreams of freedom matter more than the peace we've built? I think, Luffy said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority that had stopped the execution, that anyone who calls murdering my brother justice deserves whatever's coming to them. The attack came without warning. Akainu's magma fist shot forward like a cannonball, aimed directly at Luffy's chest. Fast enough to catch most opponents off guard, hot enough to melt through steel, backed by the full force of an admiral's strength. Luffy wasn't there when it arrived. He'd moved before Akainu had even fully committed to the attack, his observation Haki having seen it coming from 3 moves away. Instead of dodging backward or to the side like most people would, he'd stepped forward and left, flowing around the magma fist like water around a stone. Too slow, he said, and his own fist, coated in advanced armament Haki, slammed into Akainu's ribs. The Admiral's eyes went wide, not just from the impact, though the punch had enough force behind it to crack stone, but from the nature of the Haki coating Luffy's hand. This wasn't basic armament, the kind most fighters used to harden their skin and weapons. This was Ryu, the advanced application that could bypass external defenses and strike directly at the target's internals. Pain exploded through Akainu's torso as the invisible force of Luffy's Haki punched through his magma body and hit his actual flesh. He staggered backward, one hand pressed to his side, staring at the young pirate with new understanding. Impossible, he breathed. That level of armament Haki, where did you learn that? Same place I learned everything else, Luffy said, flexing his fingers. The skin on his knuckles was slightly burned from contact with the Admiral's magma, but he didn't seem to notice. Trial and error. Around them, the battlefield had erupted into chaos. Marines who hadn't been knocked unconscious by the Conqueror's burst were scrambling to regroup, while the Whitebeard pirates pressed their advantage. But all eyes kept drifting back to the impossible sight at the center of it all. A 17-year-old rookie trading blows with an admiral and holding his own. "Luffy," Ivankov's voice cut through the noise. "What are you doing? We need to reach Ace." "I'm handling it," Luffy called back, not taking his eyes off Akainu. "Get everyone else to safety. This is going to get messy." "Like hell we're leaving you," the voice was Zoro's, and when Luffy glanced over, he saw his swordsman carving through a group of marine officers with mechanical precision. His movements were faster than usual, more desperate. The look of someone who'd realized his captain had been hiding his true strength and was determined to prove he belonged at his side. Behind Zoro came Sanji, his legs wreathed in flames as he kicked his way through enemy lines. Then Chopper, in his heaviest form, bowling over Marines like they were made of paper. Robin's hands were sprouting from every surface, tripping and disarming opponents with ruthless efficiency. Even Usopp was there, his slingshot picking off enemy snipers with deadly accuracy. His crew, his family, fighting their way across a battlefield full of marine elites and legendary pirates, not because they had to, but because they couldn't bear the thought of letting him face this alone. Something warm and painful twisted in Luffy's chest. "You idiots," he muttered, but he was smiling. "What was that?" Akainu snarled, magma beginning to coat his entire body as he prepared for his next attack. "Nothing." Luffy's stance shifted, and for the first time in the fight, he let his full presence leak out. Not just Conqueror's Haki, but the combined weight of all three types working in harmony. The air around him began to shimmer with barely contained power. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." The second exchange was faster than the first. Akainu came in with a flurry of magma punches, each one capable of melting through a battleship's hull. But Luffy wasn't fighting like a typical brawler anymore. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who could see every attack coming, who could read his opponent's intentions like a book. Duck, weave, counter, step left, punch up, roll away from the retaliating strike. And every time he connected, his advanced armament Haki bypassed Akainu's Logia intangibility to strike directly at the Admiral's true body. "How?" Akainu gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth after a particularly solid hit to his solar plexus. "How are you doing this? You want to know the secret?" Luffy asked, dodging another magma blast. "You want to know how a rookie pirate learned to fight an admiral?" He paused his attack, standing just outside Akainu's range with his arms crossed. Around them, the battle raged on, but this little pocket of space had become their private arena. "I've been holding back," Luffy said simply. "For years. Every fight, every battle, every time someone tried to hurt my friends, I held back because I was scared of what I might do if I didn't. But you know what I just realized?" Akainu's eyes narrowed. "What? I was worried about the wrong thing. I should have been scared of what would happen if I kept holding back." Before Akainu could respond, before he could prepare another attack or call for backup, Luffy moved. Not the controlled, measured movements from earlier, but an explosion of speed that covered the distance between them in a blink. His fist, coated in the darkest armament Haki anyone had ever seen, caught the Admiral square in the jaw. The sound of impact echoed across the battlefield like thunder. Akainu flew backward, his massive body carving a trench through the ice as he skidded to a stop nearly 50 feet away. For a moment, the entire war seemed to pause. Marines and pirates alike stared in shocked silence at the sight of Fleet Admiral Sakazuki flat on his back, blood streaming from his mouth, struggling to push himself upright. Then the cheering started. Not from the Marines, they looked like they'd seen a ghost. But from the pirates, from the escaped prisoners, from everyone who'd spent their lives being told that the admirals were untouchable, that challenging the world government was suicide. "Did you see that?" He knocked down Akainu. "How is that even possible?" On the execution platform, Ace was staring down at his little brother with tears in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of pride, of understanding, of finally seeing who Luffy had become when no one was looking. "You incredible idiot," he whispered. "How long have you been that strong?" But Luffy wasn't done. As Akainu struggled to his feet, as the Admiral's face twisted with rage and humiliation, the young pirate was already moving again. Not toward Akainu this time, but toward the execution platform, toward his brother. "Luffy, wait!" Whitebeard's voice boomed across the bay. "There are Pacifistas blocking the path." As if summoned by his words, 3 of the cyborg weapons emerged from behind the marine lines. Massive, imposing, their laser weapons already charging with deadly light. Each one was supposedly as strong as a warlord, capable of destroying entire pirate crews single-handedly. Luffy didn't even slow down. The first Pacifista fired its laser directly at his chest. He sidestepped the beam so casually it looked like he was avoiding a thrown pebble, his enhanced observation Haki having tracked its trajectory from the moment the weapon began charging. The second and third opened fire simultaneously, their lasers crisscrossing to create an inescapable net of destruction. Luffy jumped, not just up, but up and forward with such speed that he seemed to teleport through the air. His body passed between the laser beams like he was threading a needle, and when he came down, his fist was already moving. Gomu no. His arm stretched back, but this time it was coated in something more than just basic armament Haki. The advanced application flowed around his limb like liquid shadow, dense and precise and utterly destructive. Ryu pistol. The punch connected with the first Pacifista's chest, and the result was immediate and devastating. Instead of just denting the cyborg's armor or knocking it backward, the advanced Haki bypassed the external shell entirely and destroyed the delicate machinery inside. Sparks erupted from every joint as the Pacifista's internal systems overloaded and shut down. It toppled backward like a felled tree, completely and permanently disabled. The second Pacifista swung its massive fist toward Luffy's head. He caught it barehanded, his own fist meeting the cyborg's in a contest of pure strength. For a moment they were locked together, servos whining against enhanced muscle, artificial power against natural will. Then Luffy's armament Haki flowed down his arm and into the Pacifista's hand. The cyborg's entire arm shattered from the inside out, metal fragments spraying in all directions as the advanced Haki tore through circuits and processors like they were made of paper. Before the machine could react, Luffy's other hand was already moving, a palm strike to the center of its chest that sent invisible force punching through its core systems. 2 down. The third Pacifista, showing more tactical awareness than its destroyed siblings, began charging multiple lasers simultaneously. Its mouth opened, chest panels slid back, and even its eyes began to glow with deadly energy. It was going to fire everything at once, creating a field of destruction that even Luffy's enhanced speed couldn't avoid. Luffy smiled. For the first time since the fight began, he used his devil fruit power. Gomu no balloon. His body inflated like a rubber ball, expanding to 3 times its normal size. But instead of just getting bigger, his skin took on that telltale black sheen of armament Haki. Not just on his fists or arms, but covering his entire inflated form like armor. The lasers hit him dead on, all of them, creating an explosion that lit up the battlefield like a miniature sun. Smoke and steam obscured everything for a moment, and more than one Marine allowed themselves to hope that the terrifying rookie had finally been stopped. Then the smoke cleared, and Luffy was still there. Still inflated, still covered in Haki, completely unharmed. "My turn," he said cheerfully. He deflated rapidly, his body snapping back to normal size with rubber band tension. But instead of just returning to his regular proportions, he used that kinetic energy to launch himself forward like a slingshot. His fist, still coated in advanced armament Haki, punched clean through the Pacifista's head. The cyborg's eyes went dark as its main processing unit ceased to exist, and it crashed to the ground in a heap of expensive scrap metal. 3 Pacifistas, 30 seconds, done. The battlefield had gone silent again, but this time the quiet was different. This wasn't shock or surprise. This was the hushed reverence people showed in the presence of something beyond their understanding. Luffy stood among the wreckage of the 3 cyborgs, not even breathing hard, looking up at the execution platform where his brother waited. The path was clear now, the marine defenses broken, nothing standing between him and his goal but distance. "Ace," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the water. "Sorry I'm late." On the platform, Portgas D. Ace was crying openly now. Not from fear or despair, but from overwhelming emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, love, gratitude, all mixed together with the simple joy of seeing his little brother again. "You idiot," he managed to choke out. "How did you get so strong?" Luffy grinned up at him, and for just a moment he looked like the same carefree kid who used to follow Ace and Sabo through the forests of MT. "Kalubo, I had a good teacher," he said. Then his expression hardened, and he looked around at the Marines still standing, at the Admirals regrouping, at Sengoku preparing to coordinate a counterattack. When he spoke again, his voice carried the absolute authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Anyone who tries to stop me from reaching my brother," he said quietly, "is going to have a very bad day." And across the battlefield, among Marines and pirates alike, the same thought echoed through dozens of minds. This changes everything. The path to the execution platform stretched out before Luffy like a gauntlet designed by the gods themselves. Even with the Pacifistas destroyed and half the Marine forces unconscious, dozens of officers still blocked his way. Vice admirals with decades of experience, captains who'd made their names hunting pirates across the Grand Line, soldiers who'd sworn their lives to absolute justice. None of them moved to stop him. Oh, they wanted to. Luffy could feel their intentions pressing against his observation Haki like physical weight, the desire to fight, to prove themselves, to uphold their duties. But they could also feel what he'd become in the last few minutes. The aura of barely contained power that surrounded him like a thundercloud, the casual way he'd dismantled 3 Pacifistas, the simple fact that he'd traded blows with Admiral Akainu and come out ahead. Fear was a powerful thing. Even among the Marines, even among people trained to fight monsters, there were limits to what courage could overcome. "Move," Luffy said quietly as he approached a cluster of Marine officers. Not a threat, not a demand, just a simple statement of fact. They moved. "This is unacceptable," the voice came from above, filled with righteous fury. Fleet Admiral Sengoku stood atop the execution platform, his massive form silhouetted against the sky. Even at this distance, his presence was overwhelming. The weight of absolute authority, decades of command, the power to reshape entire islands with his devil fruit ability. A single pirate does not dictate terms to the Marines. Sengoku's body began to glow with golden light as he activated his human fruit model, Buddha. "If you want to reach your brother, you'll have to go through me." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Sengoku's already impressive frame expanded, growing to nearly 3 times its normal size as golden energy wreathed his form. His human features became more stylized, more perfect, radiating an aura of divine judgment that made the air itself seem to hum with power. Buddha Sengoku was a legend among Marines, a figure who'd stood toe-to-toe with the Pirate King himself. His shockwaves could level mountains, his presence could inspire armies, and his tactical mind had orchestrated the downfall of countless pirate crews. Luffy looked up at him and felt nothing. No fear, no intimidation, no hesitation, just a mild curiosity about how this was going to play out. "You know," he said, continuing his steady walk toward the platform, "everyone keeps trying to scare me with their reputations. I'm an admiral, I'm a fleet admiral, I fought Roger. But you know what I've figured out?" Sengoku's eyes narrowed. "What? Reputations don't win fights, power does, and skill. And the will to do whatever it takes to protect the people you love." He paused at the base of the platform, looking up at the golden figure towering above him. "So let me ask you something, Fleet Admiral. How much do you love the Marines under your command?" "What kind of question is that?" Sengoku demanded. "The kind that matters." Luffy's expression was calm, almost conversational. "Because I love my brother more than anything in this world, and that means I'm willing to do things you can't even imagine to save him." Before Sengoku could respond, Luffy moved. Not up the stairs, not around the platform's defenses, but straight up. His legs coiled like springs, armament Haki flowing through his muscles to enhance their natural elasticity, and he launched himself into the air with enough force to crack the ice beneath his feet. Sengoku's palm came down like a meteor, golden energy focused into a shockwave that could flatten buildings. But Luffy was already twisting in midair. His observation Haki having seen the attack coming from the moment Sengoku began to move. The shockwave passed inches from his body, and he used the displaced air currents to adjust his trajectory. His fist, coated in the advanced armament Haki that had already proven capable of bypassing Logia defenses, punched directly into Sengoku's enlarged palm. The result was spectacular. Golden energy clashed with invisible force, creating a blast of displaced air that shattered windows for miles around. For a moment, the two forces were perfectly balanced, divine authority against absolute determination. Then Luffy's Haki began to penetrate. Sengoku's eyes went wide as he felt the foreign energy working its way through his devil fruit transformation, bypassing the golden light to strike at his actual flesh beneath. Pain lanced up his arm, the first real injury he'd taken in this entire war. "Impossible," he breathed. "That technique, where did you learn that?" "Same place I learned everything else," Luffy replied, using Sengoku's momentary shock to spring off the Fleet Admiral's hand and launch himself toward Ace. "By refusing to let the people I care about die." He landed on the platform between the unconscious executioners, his feet hitting the wooden planks with surprising gentleness. Up close, Ace looked worse than he had from a distance. The sea-stone shackles had drained his strength, leaving him pale and shaking. But his eyes were alert, focused, filled with an emotion Luffy couldn't quite name. "Hey, Ace," Luffy said softly, dropping to one knee beside his brother. "You look terrible, Luffy." Ace's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. How are you here? How did you get this strong?" "Long story." Luffy examined the sea stone cuffs, his enhanced senses taking in every detail of their construction. "I'll tell you later. Right now, let's get you out of these things." "You can't break sea stone," Ace warned. "Even with Haki, it's impossible. The stuff is harder than diamond." Luffy smiled. "Good thing I've been practicing on hard things." He placed his hands on the shackles, and Ace felt something strange happening. Not just the familiar sensation of armament Haki, this was something deeper, more refined. The energy flowed around the sea stone like water around a stone, seeking weaknesses, finding the microscopic imperfections in the supposedly perfect material. Then it found what it was looking for. "Ryu," Luffy murmured, and his Haki flowed inward. Instead of trying to break the sea stone from the outside, the advanced armament Haki bypassed the surface entirely and struck at the internal structure. Not the material itself, but the bonds holding it together, the fundamental forces that gave it its legendary durability. The shackles didn't break, they disintegrated. One moment they were there, solid and immutable, the next they were crumbling to dust between Luffy's fingers. Ace stared at his freed wrists in amazement, feeling his devil fruit power rushing back like a dam bursting. "That's not possible," Sengoku said from behind them, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Sea stone is indestructible. It's been tested against every form of attack imaginable." "Maybe you weren't trying hard enough," Luffy replied without turning around. He was helping Ace to his feet, steadying his brother as strength slowly returned to his legs. "Luffy," Ace said quietly, "what happened to you? The last time I saw you, you could barely throw a decent punch. Now you're fighting admirals and breaking sea stone like it's made of glass." The question hung between them, heavy with years of separation and missed opportunities. How could Luffy explain the weight of that day 12 years ago, the terror of watching Sabo die, the desperate need to become strong enough to prevent it from happening again? How could he describe the loneliness of hiding his true strength, the constant fear that he was becoming something his friends wouldn't recognize? "I got scared," he said finally. "Really scared. And I decided I never wanted to feel that helpless again." Before Ace could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed across the platform. Sengoku was climbing the stairs, his golden form diminished but still radiating authority. Behind him, other Marine officers were beginning to regroup, their shock giving way to grim determination. "It's over, Straw Hat," Sengoku called out. "You've freed your brother, but you're still surrounded by 50,000 Marines. There's nowhere to run." "Who said anything about running?" The voice came from the bay below, booming with laughter and barely contained power. Whitebeard stood at the bow of the Moby Dick, his bicento raised high, and for the first time since the battle began, he looked genuinely pleased. "Gyururara, outstanding work, Straw Hat. You've given us exactly what we needed." "What we needed?" Sengoku's voice was sharp with suspicion. "A distraction," Marco called out from where he was hovering above the battlefield. "While you were all watching Luffy's one-man war, we've been repositioning our forces. All division commanders are ready for immediate withdrawal." "Withdrawal?" Ace looked confused. "But Pops, we can still fight." "No, my son." Whitebeard's voice was gentle but firm. "The boy was right about this being a trap. The Marines have been planning to slaughter everyone who came here today, and I won't give them the chance. We got what we came for." As if to emphasize his point, Whitebeard's devil fruit power activated, not the earth-shattering earthquakes he was famous for, but something more subtle. The ice beneath the Marine forces began to crack and shift, creating channels and barriers that would funnel their pursuit into predictable patterns. "Besides," the Emperor continued, his eyes finding Luffy's across the distance, "I think we've all learned something important today. The next generation isn't waiting for us to step aside. They're already here." The compliment hit Luffy harder than any physical blow. Recognition from Edward Newgate, the man who'd sailed with the Pirate King, who'd been Ace's father in all the ways that mattered. For a moment, he felt like that little kid again, desperate for approval from the older brothers he'd always tried to keep up with. "Thank you," he said quietly, knowing Whitebeard would hear him. "Don't thank me yet, boy. This war isn't over. Sakazuki won't let us leave peacefully, and his pride is wounded. That makes him dangerous." As if summoned by the words, a pillar of magma erupted from the ice below the platform. Admiral Akainu rose from the molten rock like an avenging angel, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. The burns from Luffy's earlier attacks were visible on his skin, dark patches where the advanced Haki had bypassed his Logia intangibility. "You think this is over?" he snarled, his entire body beginning to smoke with barely contained heat. You think you can make a mockery of marine justice and just walk away? Yeah, pretty much, Luffy replied calmly. That was the plan. Akainu's response was a roar of pure rage. Magma erupted from his fists in a continuous stream, not aimed at Luffy, but at the execution platform itself. The wooden structure began to burn and collapse, forcing everyone to leap to safety. Luffy grabbed Ace around the waist and jumped, his rubber body stretching to absorb the impact as they landed on a floating chunk of ice 20 feet away. Around them, Marines and pirates alike were scrambling for cover, as Akainu's fury turned the battlefield into a hellscape of molten rock and superheated steam. He's lost it, Ace observed, flames beginning to dance around his own fists as his strength returned. Akainu was always extreme, but this is something else. He's scared, Luffy said, his observation Haki reading the Admiral's emotional state like an open book. Scared that what happened here today will change everything. Scared that people will stop being afraid of the Marines. Scared that his version of justice isn't as absolute as he thought. Good, Ace said grimly. Let him be scared. But even as they talked, Luffy could feel the situation changing around them. The other Marine forces were regrouping, the Admirals were coordinating their response, and Akainu's rage was starting to focus into something more dangerous, tactical fury, the kind that had made him one of the most feared men in the world. We need to move, he said, all of us, now. Agreed, came Whitebeard's voice from across the water. All ships begin withdrawal, division commanders cover the retreat. The Whitebeard pirates began their evacuation with military precision, each crew knowing their role and executing it flawlessly. But even as they moved, Luffy could sense the Marines adapting, preparing countermeasures, getting ready to turn the withdrawal into a running battle. Luffy, Ace said quietly, I need to ask you something. What? When we get out of here, when we're safe? Are you going to tell me the truth about what really happened to make you this strong, about what you've been hiding all these years? Luffy was quiet for a moment, watching the chaos of the battlefield around them. His crew was somewhere in that mess, fighting their way toward him with everything they had. Whitebeard's forces were beginning their withdrawal, but he could already feel Akainu preparing to give chase. The war was far from over and the hardest parts were still to come. Yeah, he said finally, I'll tell you everything, but Ace, what? You're not going to like some of it. Before Ace could ask what he meant, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. Akainu had launched himself into the air, his entire body transformed into a meteor of molten rock, aimed directly at the Moby Dick. WHITBARD, he roared. You think you can protect them? You think your legend means anything against absolute justice? The Admiral's attack would have devastated the flagship, potentially killing dozens of Whitebeard's crew. But it never landed. A wall of blue flames intercepted the magma meteor, Marco in his phoenix form taking the hit directly. The 1st Division commander was thrown backward by the impact, his regeneration working overtime to heal the damage, but he'd bought them precious seconds. Go, he called out, pain evident in his voice. I'll hold him off. Like hell you will, Luffy said, and before anyone could stop him, he was moving again. Not toward the ships, not toward safety, but straight at Admiral Akainu. His body blurred with speed as he launched himself through the air, armament Haki coating his fists like liquid shadow. Luffy, no, Ace called out, but his brother was already beyond reach. The collision between Luffy and Akainu lit up the sky like a second sun. Rubber and magma, advanced Haki and raw elemental fury, the weight of absolute determination against the crushing force of military authority. They fell toward the ice together, locked in combat, neither giving an inch. When they hit the frozen bay, the impact created a crater 30 feet across. Steam and smoke obscured everything for a moment, and when it cleared, both fighters were still standing. Akainu's magma was crackling with heat, but Luffy's Haki was holding firm, protecting him from the worst of the Admiral's power. You want to know why I'm so strong? Luffy asked, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. You want to know what made me this way? Akainu's only response was another magma punch, which Luffy dodged with fluid grace. I watched my brother die, Luffy continued, his own counterattack forcing the Admiral to step back. I watched him get shot by a world noble while I was too weak to save him. I felt his life force fade through my observation Haki, felt him die alone and scared while I stood there helpless. Another exchange of blows, faster now, more violent. Around them, the ice began to crack and melt from the heat of their battle. That's when I realized something important, Luffy said, his armament Haki beginning to take on a darker shade, more advanced, more dangerous. The world government doesn't get to decide who lives and dies. Justice doesn't get to murder my family. And people like you. His next punch caught Akainu in the solar plexus, the advanced Haki punching through the Admiral's defenses to strike directly at his internal organs. People like you don't get to hurt my brothers ever again. Akainu staggered backward, blood trickling from his mouth, staring at the young pirate with something approaching recognition. This wasn't just another rookie with a big mouth. This was something else entirely, something that had been forged in loss and tempered by years of careful control, something that might actually be strong enough to change the world. Impossible, he whispered. No, Luffy said quietly. Just overdue. And as the battle raged around them, as Marines and pirates clashed in the shadow of their conflict, Monkey D. Luffy finally let himself become what he'd been hiding from for 12 long years. A monster with the power to protect everything he loved. The war was about to enter its final, most dangerous phase. The crater where Luffy and Akainu stood was growing larger with each exchange of blows, the ice beneath their feet melting and reforming in endless cycles. Steam rose around them like fog, obscuring the details of their battle from the watching crowds, but the sound of their conflict echoed across the entire bay. Fist against fist, Haki against magma, determination against fury. And slowly, impossibly, Luffy was winning. Not easily. Every punch from Akainu carried enough heat to melt steel, every technique backed by decades of combat experience. But the Admiral's attacks kept missing by inches, his most devastating moves hitting empty air as Luffy's observation Haki showed him the future before it happened. Stand still, Akainu roared, frustration bleeding through his usual cold control. No thanks, Luffy replied, sliding under a magma blast that would have taken his head off. His counterpunch caught Akainu in the ribs, advanced armament Haki punching through the Admiral's defenses to strike directly at his actual body. Around the crater, the evacuation was proceeding smoothly. The Whitebeard pirates had reached their ships, the escaped prisoners were being loaded onto rescue vessels, and even Luffy's crew had managed to regroup near the bay's edge. Everything was going according to plan. That's when Akainu decided to change tactics. You know, the Admiral said, stepping back from their physical confrontation, I'm curious about something, Straw Hat. What makes you think this victory means anything? Luffy's eyes narrowed. Something in Akainu's tone had shifted, become more calculating. This wasn't the wild fury from moments before. This was the cold, strategic mind that had risen through the Marine ranks by understanding his enemy's weaknesses. Even if you save your brother today, Akainu continued conversationally, what happens tomorrow? What happens when the world government realizes that Portgas D. Ace, son of the Pirate King, is still alive? Do you think they'll just forget about him? They can try whatever they want, Luffy said, but he could feel his observation Haki picking up something wrong. Ace's emotional state was shifting, anger and guilt swirling together in a dangerous combination. Oh, they'll do more than try. Akainu's smile was cruel, predatory. They'll hunt him across every ocean. They'll put bounties on the heads of anyone who helps him. They'll burn down every island he visits, kill every innocent person who gives him shelter, all because you were too selfish to let him die cleanly. Shut up. Luffy's voice was flat, dangerous. And what about your crew? Your precious Nakama, Akainu pressed on, his words hitting like physical blows. How long before the government decides they're too dangerous to live? How long before your reckless heroism gets them all killed? I said shut up, but Akainu wasn't done. His attention shifted away from Luffy entirely, focusing on the figure standing on a chunk of ice 30 feet away. Ace had been watching the battle with growing concern, flames beginning to dance around his fists as his strength returned. Tell me, Fire Fist, Akainu called out, his voice carrying easily across the water. How does it feel to know that your little brother has doomed himself for your worthless life? Don't listen to him, Ace, Luffy shouted, his observation Haki showing him exactly where this was going. He's trying to, Whitebeard must be proud, Akainu continued, ignoring Luffy entirely. His son turned out to be such a coward, running away from fights, hiding behind his little brother, too weak to even die properly when the time comes. Ace's flames flared brighter, but he stayed where he was. Years of sailing with Whitebeard had taught him to recognize psychological warfare, and he wasn't going to. Of course, what can you expect from the son of a coward like Roger? The words hit the battlefield like lightning. Everything went silent, the clash of weapons, the shouts of orders, even the sound of waves against ice. Every person within earshot turned to stare at Admiral Akainu, wondering if he'd really just said what they thought he'd heard. Because insulting Gall D. Roger was one thing. Calling the Pirate King a coward was just tactical provocation. But saying it in front of his son, in front of the man who'd spent his entire life defending his father's memory, was something else entirely. "What did you just say?" Ace's voice was deadly quiet. "No," Luffy whispered, his observation Haki showing him flashes of the immediate future. Ace moving forward, Akainu preparing his attack, the magma fist that would punch through his brother's chest. "Ace, don't! I said Roger was a coward," Akainu shouted, his voice carrying across the entire battlefield. A coward and a criminal who brought nothing but chaos to the world. Just like his pathetic son, Ace exploded into motion. Not literally, though flames erupted around him in a column of fire that reached toward the sky, but with the kind of sudden violent movement that came from years of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. He launched himself across the water toward Akainu, his entire body wreathed in fire, murder written across his features. "Take it back," Ace roared. "Take it back or I'll kill you." "Ace, no." Luffy was moving too, his own body blurring with speed as he tried to intercept his brother. His observation Haki was screaming warnings at him, showing him the trap that Akainu had laid with his words. "It's what he wants, don't." But Ace wasn't listening. 23 years of defending his father's name, of fighting anyone who dared speak against Gall D. Roger, had taught him only one response to this kind of insult. Violence. Immediate, overwhelming, decisive violence. He reached Akainu a split second before Luffy could catch up to him. His flaming fist, enhanced by years of combat experience and righteous fury, slammed into the Admiral's face with enough force to crater stone. It should have been devastating. Ace was one of the strongest fighters in the New World, his devil fruit power refined to lethal perfection, his Haki skilled enough to clash with Marines and come out ahead. But Akainu had been ready for this exact attack. The Admiral's head flowed around Ace's punch like liquid, his Logia intangibility allowing the fire to pass harmlessly through his magma body. At the same time, his other hand was already moving, shaped into a spear of molten rock aimed directly at Ace's heart. "Gotcha," Akainu whispered. Luffy's observation Haki showed him everything in perfect, horrible clarity. The trajectory of Akainu's attack, the precise angle that would punch through Ace's chest, the split second of time before his brother died right in front of him. He could see Ace's eyes going wide with realization, could feel his brother's shock as he understood that he'd walked directly into a trap. Just like Sabo, just like that day 12 years ago when Luffy had watched helplessly as someone he loved was killed by the world government's casual cruelty. Not again. Luffy moved faster than he'd ever moved in his life. Faster than thought, faster than physics should have allowed, his body stretching and contracting in ways that defied every law of nature. He reached Ace just as Akainu's magma spear began to extend, throwing himself between his brother and the killing blow. "Luffy," Ace screamed, but it was too late. Akainu's fist, shaped into a spear of molten rock hot enough to melt diamonds, punched clean through Luffy's chest. For a moment, the world stopped. The pain was indescribable, not just physical, though the agony of having his ribcage punched apart was bad enough, but emotional. The crushing weight of failure, of being too slow, too weak, too human to save the people he loved. "Again, no," Ace's voice was breaking, tears streaming down his face as he watched his little brother impaled on Akainu's magma fist. "Not you, not because of me." Akainu's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as he stared at the young pirate he'd just punched through. There should have been blood, screaming, the immediate collapse that came with mortal injury. Instead, Luffy was still standing, still conscious, looking down at the magma spear through his chest with something approaching curiosity. "That's weird," Luffy said conversationally. "I thought that would hurt more, because it wasn't hurting, not anymore. The initial shock of impact had been overwhelming, but now there was something else flowing through him. Not pain, not fear, but power. Raw, unlimited, absolute power that seemed to be pouring into him from somewhere deep inside his own soul. His conqueror's Haki was awakening. Not just the basic version he'd been using for years, but something far more advanced. Something that other users called coding, the ability to infuse objects and attacks with royal will itself, making them strong enough to clash with the fundamental forces of nature. Strong enough to turn rubber into something harder than sea stone. Akainu tried to withdraw his fist, but it wouldn't move. Luffy's chest, still impaled by the magma spear, had somehow become solid enough to trap the Admiral's attack. Not through armament Haki, this was something else, something that made the air itself seem to hum with barely contained energy. "What?" Akainu's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you?" Luffy looked up at him, and for the first time the Admiral saw the young pirate's eyes clearly. They weren't just flecked with gold anymore. They were burning, literally burning, with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. "I'm someone who doesn't let his brothers die," Luffy said quietly. Then his own fist, coated in Conqueror's Haki so advanced it was visible as streams of black lightning, punched directly into Akainu's solar plexus. The Admiral flew backward like he'd been shot from a cannon, his massive body carving a trench through the ice as he skidded to a stop nearly 100 feet away. For the first time in the battle, for the first time in years, Sakazuki was on his back, staring up at the sky, unable to immediately get up. Because for the first time in his adult life, someone had hurt him, really hurt him. The kind of deep, internal injury that came from having your organs rearranged by invisible force. "Impossible," he wheezed, struggling to push himself upright. Blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth, and when he tried to activate his devil fruit power, nothing happened. The advanced Conqueror's Haki had done something to his body, something that was interfering with his ability to transform into magma. Across the battlefield, the silence was absolute. Marines and pirates alike stared at the impossible sight of Admiral Akainu flat on his back, defeated by a 17-year-old rookie who was still standing despite having a hole punched through his chest. "Luffy," Ace whispered, reaching out toward his brother. "Are you?" "I'm fine." Luffy's voice was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Better than fine, actually." He was telling the truth. The hole in his chest was already beginning to close, his rubber body's natural elasticity enhanced by Conqueror's Haki to the point where even mortal wounds could be overcome through sheer force of will. More than that, he felt stronger than he ever had before. Like some fundamental limitation had been removed, some barrier he hadn't even known existed. "How?" Sengoku's voice cut across the battlefield, filled with genuine awe. "How are you still alive? How did you just beat your strongest admiral?" Luffy finished, pulling Akainu's solidified magma spear out of his chest and tossing it aside like garbage. "Easy. I stopped holding back." The truth of it hit everyone at once. This entire battle, this incredible display of power that had already reshaped their understanding of what was possible, had been Luffy restraining himself. The advanced Haki techniques, the casual destruction of Pacifistas, even the ability to trade blows with admirals, all of it had been him fighting at partial strength. "What are you?" Whitebeard called out from the Moby Dick, his voice filled with something approaching reverence. "What are you really?" Luffy looked up at him, then around at the battlefield full of marines and pirates who were staring at him like he was something from another world. His crew was there too, watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Awe, certainly. Pride, definitely. But also a kind of worried recognition, as if they were finally seeing who he'd always been underneath the masks he wore. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy," he said simply, "and I'm going to be the Pirate King." The declaration rang out across Marineford like a physical force, enhanced by unconscious Conqueror's Haki until it seemed to echo from every surface. But this time, nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed it as the foolish dream of an overconfident rookie, because they'd just watched him do the impossible. They'd seen him take a killing blow meant for his brother, survive it through pure willpower, and then defeat one of the strongest fighters in the world with a single punch. If someone like that said he was going to be Pirate King, maybe it wasn't a boast. Maybe it was just a statement of fact. Akainu finally managed to push himself into a sitting position, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. But underneath both emotions, Luffy could sense something else through his observation Haki. Fear, not for himself, but for what Luffy represented. A new generation that was stronger, faster, and more determined than anything the world government had prepared for. A generation that might actually be capable of tearing down the system the Marines had spent centuries building. "This isn't over," Akainu rasped, his voice barely audible. "Even if you beat me, even if you save your brother, there are forces in this world that you can't possibly understand. The world government has resources you can't imagine, weapons that make the admirals look like children playing with toys." "Let them come," Luffy said, his own voice carrying that new edge of absolute certainty. "I'm not the same person I was an hour ago, and I'm definitely not the same person I was 12 years ago when I was too weak to save Sabo." The name hit Ace like a physical blow. His eyes went wide, and suddenly pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed began falling into place. "Sabo," he whispered, "but Luffy, Sabo died when we were kids." "You saw it happen?" "Yeah," Luffy said quietly, his golden eyes finding his brother's. "I did. That's what made me like this. That's why I've been hiding what I can really do." Because the last time I wasn't strong enough to save someone I loved, I watched him die while the world government laughed about it. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with years of suppressed grief and carefully hidden trauma. Around them, the battle was starting to wind down. The Marine forces were retreating in the face of Luffy's overwhelming display of power, and the pirate evacuation was nearly complete. But for Luffy and Ace, there was only this moment. This long-overdue honesty between brothers who'd both been carrying secrets too heavy for any one person to bear. "You've been this strong all along?" Ace asked. "All those times you barely won fights, all those times you nearly died." "I was holding back because I was scared of becoming something you wouldn't recognize," Luffy said. "Turns out I should have been more scared of what would happen if I kept pretending to be weak." Before Ace could respond, the sound of slow clapping echoed across the battlefield. Both brothers turned to see Akainu pushing himself to his feet, blood still trickling from his mouth but his expression once again under control. "Very touching," the Admiral said, his voice dripping with disdain. "A family reunion in the middle of a war zone, how perfectly sentimental." "I thought I knocked you out," Luffy observed. "It takes more than one punch to stop absolute justice," Akainu replied, magma beginning to smoke around his fists again. "Even from a monster like you." The word hung in the air between them. Monster. Not human, not pirate, not even enemy. Something beyond category, beyond understanding, beyond the normal rules that governed conflict between Marines and criminals. "Yeah," Luffy said quietly, accepting the label for the first time in his life. "I guess I am." And as Akainu prepared for another attack, as the other admirals began to reposition themselves, as Sengoku started coordinating a final desperate assault, Monkey D., Luffy finally let himself become what he'd been running from for 12 long years. Not the cheerful, reckless pirate captain his crew knew and loved. Not the lucky rookie who somehow stumbled his way through impossible battles. But the monster who was strong enough to protect everything that mattered to him, no matter what it cost. The war was entering its final phase, and for the first time since it began, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The second round began with the fury of a natural disaster. Akainu didn't hold back this time. The moment his feet found purchase on the cracked ice, he unleashed everything he had. Massive fists of magma erupted from the ground around Luffy, each one the size of a building and hot enough to turn steel to vapor. The Admiral's body became a fountain of molten rock, his human form dissolving into something primal and terrifying. "Meteor volcano," Akainu roared, and the sky itself seemed to catch fire. Dozens of magma projectiles shot into the air, arcing high above the battlefield before beginning their descent like fallen stars. Each one carried enough destructive power to sink a warship, and they were all aimed at the small patch of ice where Luffy stood with his brother. But Luffy didn't run. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his observation Haki expand to its absolute limits. The world around him slowed to a crawl as his enhanced senses tracked every incoming projectile, calculated their trajectories, found the gaps between them that shouldn't have existed. "Ace," he said quietly, not opening his eyes. "Get to the ship." "What? No, I'm not leaving you two. This isn't a request." Luffy's voice carried that new edge of absolute authority, the weight of Conqueror's Haki making his words feel like physical commands. "I need to know you're safe so I can focus on what comes next." Ace stared at his little brother, seeing someone he'd never met before. This wasn't the cheerful kid who used to follow him through the forests of Mt. Kalubo. This was something else entirely, something that had been forged in loss and tempered by years of careful control. "Promise me you'll be careful," Ace said finally. "I promise I'll win," Luffy replied. "That's not the same thing." The first meteor hit the ice 30 feet away, creating an explosion that lit up the entire battlefield. Steam and smoke billowed everywhere as superheated rock met frozen water, but Luffy was already moving. Not running, not dodging in panic, but flowing between the impacts like water around stones. His observation Haki showed him safe paths that existed for milliseconds before being destroyed by the next wave of attacks. He slipped through gaps in the destruction that were barely wide enough for his body, his rubber form stretching and compressing to avoid the worst of the heat. To the watching Marines and pirates, it looked like magic. Like Luffy was somehow immune to Akainu's most devastating attacks, dancing through certain death with impossible grace. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He could see everything coming, and he was fast enough to do something about it. "Impossible," Akainu's voice boomed across the devastation. "No one can avoid that many attacks." "You're not thinking big enough," Luffy called back, his voice somehow carrying through the chaos. "You're still fighting like I'm human." The words hit Akainu like a slap, still fighting like he was human. As if the boy had moved beyond such limitations, become something that operated by different rules entirely. Then I'll treat you like the monster you are. Akainu's entire body began to glow white-hot as he pushed his devil fruit power to its absolute limits. The ice around him didn't just melt, it vaporized instantly, creating a cloud of superheated steam that would have cooked anyone else alive. Great Eruption, the attack was Akainu's strongest technique, a concentrated burst of magma powerful enough to punch through mountains. But instead of aiming it at Luffy directly, the Admiral fired it at the ice beneath the young pirate's feet. The explosion was apocalyptic. A column of molten rock shot up from the bay's floor, carrying with it chunks of ice the size of houses. The shockwave shattered every piece of frozen water for a mile in every direction, turning the battlefield into a maze of floating debris and superheated vapor. When the steam cleared, both fighters were airborne. Akainu had launched himself upward on a pillar of his own magma, while Luffy hung in the air through some combination of his devil fruit power and advanced Haki techniques that shouldn't have been possible. Let's see you dodge this. Akainu thrust both fists forward, and the air itself seemed to ignite. Instead of discrete magma blasts, this was a continuous stream of molten rock hot enough to melt anything it touched. There was no dodging it, no weaving between attacks. It was like trying to avoid the beam of a lighthouse, omnipresent and inescapable. Luffy didn't try to dodge. Instead, he did something that made every person watching the battle question their understanding of physics. His arms stretched back, but instead of the normal rubbery extension they'd seen before, his limbs took on that telltale black sheen of armament Haki. Not just coating the surface, but infused throughout, turning his rubber body into something harder than steel. But there was more. Black lightning began to crackle around his fists, the visible manifestation of Conqueror's Haki being applied to a physical attack. It was a technique so advanced that most people didn't even know it existed, something that marked the absolute pinnacle of Haki mastery. Gomu Gomu no, Luffy's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried across the entire battlefield with perfect clarity. King Kong Gun, the punch when it came defied description. Not just the size, though his fist had inflated to the dimensions of a small building, but the sheer presence it carried. This wasn't just a physical attack. This was royal will made manifest, the absolute authority of someone who refused to accept defeat. The collision between Luffy's Conqueror's coated fist and Akainu's molten stream created a shockwave that could be felt on islands 100 miles away. The very air seemed to crack under the pressure, reality bending around the point where two fundamental forces met and struggled for dominance. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they were perfectly matched. Magma hot enough to melt diamonds pressed against royal will strong enough to command kings, neither giving ground, neither willing to accept defeat. Then something shifted. Luffy's Conqueror's Haki began to push forward, not just matching Akainu's power but overwhelming it. The black lightning around his fist intensified, spreading outward like fractures in glass, and suddenly the Admiral's molten stream was being pushed backward. What? Akainu's eyes went wide with something approaching terror. What is that technique? Something I've been saving, Luffy replied, his voice still calm despite the incredible forces he was wielding. Something I hoped I'd never have to use. The Conqueror's coating pushed deeper into Akainu's attack, not just deflecting the magma, but somehow nullifying it entirely. Where the black lightning touched, the molten rock simply ceased to exist, cancelled out by the overwhelming force of Luffy's will. And still the attack kept coming. Admiral Akainu, the voice belonged to Kizaru, the light-based admiral appearing in a shower of golden particles. Allow me to assist. Lasers erupted from Kizaru's fingers, each beam moving at the speed of light and aimed directly at Luffy's head. It should have been impossible to dodge, impossible to even see coming. Light moved faster than thought, faster than reflex, faster than anything human could respond to. Luffy tilted his head slightly, and all 8 beams missed by inches. Busy right now, Kizaru, he said without taking his attention off Akainu. You'll have to wait your turn. But the interruption had given Akainu the opening he needed. The Admiral transformed his entire body into magma and flowed backward, escaping Luffy's devastating attack by abandoning his human form entirely. He reformed 50 feet away, his chest heaving with exertion, staring at the young pirate with new understanding. You're not just using advanced Conqueror's Haki, he said slowly. You're doing something else. Something I've never seen before. Yeah, Luffy said, his fist finally returning to normal size. I'm not holding back anymore. Around them, the battlefield had fallen into an unnatural quiet. The other conflicts, Marines versus pirates, Whitebeard's crew fighting for their lives, had slowed to a near standstill as everyone tried to process what they'd just witnessed. A 17-year-old rookie had just matched one of the strongest forces in nature with nothing but his own willpower. "This is getting out of hand," came Aokiji's voice from across the bay. The ice-based Admiral was standing on a pillar of frozen seawater, his usually lazy demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "If this keeps escalating, we're going to level the entire island." "Then maybe," boomed Whitebeard's voice from the Moby Dick, "it's time you Marines learned when you're outclassed." The Yonko stepped forward, his Bicento crackling with earthquake power. But instead of attacking, he planted the weapon firmly on his deck and looked directly at Luffy. "Boy," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the water, "you've proven your point. You've shown everyone here what you're truly capable of. But if you keep pushing like this, if you cross the line you're walking toward, there might not be any coming back." Luffy looked at him, and for a moment, the gold light in his eyes seemed to flicker with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Whitebeard said gently, "that killing changes a man. Even when it's justified, even when it's necessary, it leaves marks on your soul that never fully heal. And right now, looking at you, I can see you're about to make a choice that will define who you become." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the battlefield, everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how the young pirate would respond. Because Whitebeard was right, there was something in Luffy's posture, in the way he was looking at Akainu, that suggested he'd moved beyond simply wanting to win this fight. He wanted to end it. Permanently. "He tried to kill my brother," Luffy said quietly. "Twice. He insulted my father's memory. He spent years murdering people in the name of justice, and if I let him walk away today, he'll keep doing it tomorrow." "That's all true," Whitebeard agreed. "But the question is, what kind of pirate king do you want to be? One who solves problems with violence, or one who shows the world a better way?" For a long moment, Luffy was silent. His enhanced observation Haki was showing him branching paths, different possible futures based on the choice he made in the next few seconds. In some of them, he let Akainu live and the Admiral came back stronger, more determined, eventually succeeding in killing someone Luffy cared about. In others, he ended the threat here and now, but the act of murder changed him into something his crew wouldn't recognize. "I've already made my choice," he said finally. "Luffy," Ace called out from where he'd finally reached the Whitebeard pirates' ships. "Whatever you're thinking, remember who you are, remember who you want to be." "I am remembering," Luffy replied, his attention turning back to Akainu. "I'm remembering what it felt like to watch Sabo die. I'm remembering what it felt like to think I was going to lose you. And I'm remembering that sometimes, the only way to protect the people you love is to remove the things that threaten them." Akainu's expression shifted from concern to grim satisfaction. Finally, you're starting to understand what real power requires, what justice demands." "No," Luffy said, and there was something terrible in his voice. "I understand what protecting my family requires. That's not the same thing as justice." His body began to change, not growing larger like before, but becoming denser, more focused. The Conqueror's Haki around him intensified until it was visible to everyone on the battlefield, crackling like black lightning and making the very air seem heavy with suppressed violence. "This is your last chance, Akainu," Luffy said, his voice carrying that absolute authority that marked true kings. "Walk away. Leave my brother alone. Find a different path for your justice that doesn't involve murdering my family." "Never." Akainu's own power flared in response, his entire body becoming a beacon of molten fury. "I am absolute justice. I don't negotiate with criminals, and I don't show mercy to the enemies of peace." "Then you've made your choice too." The final exchange happened faster than thought. Both fighters moved simultaneously, Akainu launching himself forward in a spear of concentrated magma, while Luffy seemed to simply disappear from where he'd been standing. When they met in the center of the battlefield, when Magma Fist collided with Conqueror's Coded Punch, the sound was like reality breaking. But this time, there was no stalemate. This time, Luffy's attack didn't just match Akainu's power, it shattered it. The advanced Conqueror's Haki punched through the Admiral's magma form like it was made of paper, bypassing every defense, every technique, every evolutionary advantage that came with being a Logia user. Akainu's eyes went wide as he felt Luffy's fist, coated in impossible power, punch clean through his chest where his heart should be. "Impossible," he whispered, blood bubbling from his lips. "My magma, it should have." "You can't just— Your magma is hot," Luffy said quietly, his fist still buried in the Admiral's chest. "But my will is absolute." For a moment that lasted forever, they hung there in the air above the battlefield. the most feared admiral in marine history and the rookie pirate who had just done the impossible. Then Akainu began to fall. The silence that followed was complete. 50,000 marines and pirates, 3 remaining admirals, one of the 4 emperors and the fleet admiral himself, all of them staring at the sight of Sakazuki, the embodiment of absolute justice, falling toward the ice with a hole punched through his chest. "He did it," someone whispered. "He actually did it. Admiral Akainu is. How is that even possible?" But Luffy wasn't listening to the shocked murmurs. He was falling too, the incredible exertion of his final attack having drained him completely. His conqueror's haki flickered and faded, his body returning to its normal size, and for the first time since the battle began, he looked like what he actually was. A 17-year-old boy who had just killed a man. The weight of it hit him as he fell, not physical weight but emotional. He'd crossed a line that he could never uncross, become something he could never unbecome. The cheerful, reckless pirate captain who believed everyone could be saved was gone, replaced by someone willing to kill to protect his family. He hit the ice hard, his body bouncing once before coming to rest in a crater of his own making. Above him, Akainu's body was still falling, still trailing smoke and magma and the bitter scent of defeat. When the Admiral finally hit the ground 30 feet away, he didn't get back up. Admiral Sakazuki, the man who had embodied absolute justice for decades, was dead, and Monkey D. Luffy, who had never wanted to kill anyone, had become a killer. The war was over, but the real consequences were just beginning. The silence stretched across Marineford like a physical thing, broken only by the sound of waves lapping against ice and the distant crackle of dying fires. 50,000 people, marines, pirates, prisoners, kings, and commoners alike, stared at the impossible sight before them. Admiral Sakazuki lay motionless on the cracked ice, steam rising from the hole in his chest where his heart had been. The man who had embodied absolute justice for over a decade, who had been considered untouchable by all but the strongest fighters in the world, was dead. Killed by a 17-year-old pirate who was now lying in his own crater, staring up at the sky with hollow eyes. Sakazuki, Sengoku's voice was barely a whisper, his face pale with shock. The fleet admiral had seen many things in his long career, the execution of Gal D. Roger, the rise and fall of legendary pirates, battles that reshaped entire nations. But he had never imagined this. One of his admirals, dead, at the hands of a rookie. Is he really? Kizaru's usual lazy drawl was gone, replaced by something approaching genuine emotion. The light-based admiral was staring at his fallen colleague with an expression of complete disbelief. Yes, Aokiji's response was quiet, final. He's gone. Around the battlefield, the implications began to sink in. Marines who had spent their entire careers following Akainu's brutal brand of justice looked lost, confused, like children who had just learned their father wasn't invincible. Pirates who had lived in terror of the Admiral's name were laughing, crying, shouting in celebration. But not everyone was celebrating. Luffy. Ace's voice cut through the chaos as he landed on the ice beside his brother's crater. The fire fist dropped to his knees, reaching out to touch Luffy's shoulder. "Hey, you did it, you won." Luffy didn't respond immediately. His golden eyes were fixed on something far above the battlefield, seeing nothing and everything at once. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, distant. "I killed him." "Yeah," Ace said softly. "You did. I've never killed anyone before." Luffy's hands were shaking, though whether from exhaustion or emotional trauma, Ace couldn't tell. I always believed there had to be another way. Sometimes there isn't." The voice belonged to Whitebeard, who had somehow crossed the battlefield without anyone noticing. The Yonko stood at the edge of the crater, looking down at the young pirate with something approaching paternal concern. "Sometimes, to protect what matters most, you have to become something you never wanted to be." "Did it change you?" Luffy asked, still not moving from where he lay. "The first time you killed someone," Whitebeard was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "It did, not all at once, not in ways you'd notice immediately, but yes, it changed me. The question is whether you let that change make you stronger or let it destroy who you are." Around them, the battle was winding down in the strangest way possible. Marines weren't retreating, they were simply standing still, staring at their fallen admiral, trying to process a reality that shouldn't have been possible. Some were crying, others looked angry, most just looked lost. "All forces," Sengoku's voice boomed across the battlefield, enhanced by his devil fruit power. "Maintain positions, this battle is not over." But even as he spoke, the fleet admiral knew his words rang hollow. How could they continue fighting after witnessing this? How could they maintain the illusion of marine superiority when one of their strongest had just been killed by a teenager? Actually, came a new voice from the Moby Dick. I think it is. Marco landed beside Whitebeard, his phoenix flames flickering around him as he surveyed the battlefield. Pops, most of our forces are already back on the ships. The evacuation is complete. And the Marines? Whitebeard asked, though his eyes never left Luffy. In shock, about half of them are questioning everything they believe in right now. The other half are too scared to move. It was true. Across the battlefield, Marine soldiers were looking at each other with uncertainty, their weapons lowered, their formation discipline collapsed. Some were already backing toward their ships, while others seemed frozen in place. This is what happens, Whitebeard said quietly, addressing Luffy but speaking loud enough for others to hear. When an absolute system meets an immovable will, the system breaks. I didn't want to break anything, Luffy said, finally pushing himself into a sitting position. I just wanted to save Ace. And you did. Ace squeezed his brother's shoulder. You saved me, you saved everyone who came here today, and you showed the world that the Marines aren't invincible. That has to count for something. But Luffy shook his head. Look at them, Ace, look at their faces. Ace followed his gaze to the nearest group of Marine soldiers. They were young, most of them, probably fresh recruits who had joined up believing in justice and protection. Now they stood in stunned silence, watching steam rise from their admiral's corpse, and Ace could see something breaking in their eyes. Faith, the absolute certainty that they were on the right side, that their cause was just, that their leaders were worthy of following. All of it crumbling in real time. They believed in him, Luffy continued, his voice heavy with something that might have been guilt. Believed that absolute justice was real, that he was protecting them from people like us, and I destroyed that. Maybe they needed it destroyed, Whitebeard observed. Maybe blind faith in absolute justice was never the answer. But what replaces it? Luffy asked. What do they believe in now? It was a question none of them could answer, and the weight of it hung in the air like smoke. Enough! The roar came from Sengoku, his Buddha form glowing with golden fury as he leaped from the execution platform. His massive fist, wreathed in shockwave energy, slammed into the ice between Luffy and the Whitebeard pirates with enough force to create a new crater. I don't care what you've done to Sakazuki, the fleet admiral snarled. I don't care if you've shaken my men's faith. This is still war, and you are still criminals who threaten the peace of the world. His attack came without warning, a palm strike that generated a shockwave capable of leveling city blocks. But Luffy, despite his emotional state, despite the trauma of what he'd just done, still had his observation Haki active. He rolled aside as the shockwave passed over him, the displaced air ruffling his hair but otherwise leaving him unharmed. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, he said quietly, pushing himself to his feet. I don't want to fight you too. Too bad. Sengoku's fist came down again, and this time Luffy didn't dodge. He caught the massive golden hand with both of his own, armament Haki flowing through his arms to match the fleet admiral's strength. For a moment, they were locked together, golden Buddha energy against invisible force, institutional authority against personal will. But there was no contest. Luffy had just killed an admiral. His power was at its peak, enhanced by the emotional intensity of the battle and the awakening of his advanced abilities. Sengoku's attack ground to a halt, stopped cold by a teenager who looked exhausted and hollow-eyed but remained utterly immovable. You want to know the difference between us? Luffy asked, his voice carrying across the battlefield despite being barely above a whisper. You're fighting to maintain a system. I'm fighting to protect my family, and family will always be stronger than systems. He pushed gently and Sengoku stumbled backward, not thrown, not defeated, just moved. Like a child being guided away from something dangerous by a patient adult. This war is over, Luffy continued, looking around at the Marines still standing on the battlefield. Not because I won, but because everyone here has seen what absolute justice really looks like. They've seen what happens when an unstoppable force meets someone who refuses to be stopped. His gaze found individual faces in the crowd, young Marines with tears in their eyes, veteran officers staring at their hands like they'd never seen them before, captains and commodores questioning everything they'd spent their lives believing. You can keep fighting if you want, he said to them directly. But ask yourselves this, what are you fighting for now? What cause is worth dying for when your strongest champion is already dead? The questions hit the Marines like physical blows. Some actually took steps backward, their weapons clattering to the ice. Others looked to their officers for guidance, only to find their commanders just as lost and confused as they were. You think this changes anything? Sengoku demanded, but there was desperation in his voice now. You think killing one admiral will bring down the world government? No, Luffy replied honestly. But I think it proves that change is possible, that even the strongest systems have cracks in them, that maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't have to be run by people who think justice means murdering anyone who disagrees with them. He looked down at Akainu's body one more time, and something shifted in his expression. The hollow shock was still there, but underneath it was something else. Resolution, maybe, or acceptance. I didn't want to become a killer, he said, addressing the battlefield at large. I spent years trying to find ways to solve problems without taking lives, but some people, he paused, his golden eyes finding Sengoku's. Some people make that impossible. Some people are so committed to their version of justice that the only way to stop them is to remove them entirely. And what does that make you? Sengoku asked. Luffy considered the question seriously. Someone who protects his family, he said finally. Whatever the cost. The admission rang across Marineford like a funeral bell. Here was Monkey D. Luffy, the rookie pirate who had laughed his way through the first half of the Grand Line, acknowledging that he had fundamentally changed. That innocence, once lost, could never be fully recovered. All ships, Whitebeard's voice cut through the heavy atmosphere, prepare for immediate departure. Around the bay, the Whitebeard pirates began their final withdrawal. Not frantically, not in panic, but with the methodical efficiency of people who had accomplished their mission. Ace was safe. The war was won. It was time to leave before the Marines regrouped and decided to continue the slaughter. Luffy, Ace said softly, we need to go. Yeah. Luffy took one last look at the battlefield, at the Marines struggling with shattered faith, at the pirates celebrating their impossible victory, at the body of Admiral Akainu cooling on the ice. Yeah, we do. But as they walked toward the ships, as the evacuation reached its final stages, Luffy couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in him. Not just his power, not just his reputation, but something deeper. Some essential part of who he was had been burned away in the heat of battle, replaced by something harder and colder. Hey Luffy, it was Zoro appearing beside him with that familiar concerned expression. You okay? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. I don't know, Luffy said honestly. Ask me again tomorrow. Behind them, Marineford burned. Ahead of them lay an uncertain future in a world that had just learned that the Marines weren't invincible, that absolute justice was a lie, and that sometimes the only way to create change was to break the things that couldn't be fixed. The war was over, but the real battle, the struggle to remain human after doing inhuman things, was just beginning. As the pirate ships sailed away from the burning island, carrying with them the living symbol of a new era, one thought echoed through the minds of everyone who had witnessed the impossible. Nothing would ever be the same again. The collapse came without warning. One moment Luffy was walking across the deck of the Moby Dick, accepting congratulations and concerned looks from the Whitebeard pirates, and the next he was on his knees, blood pouring from his mouth as his body finally acknowledged what he'd put it through. Luffy, Chopper was at his side instantly, his small hooves pressing against his captain's chest as he began his examination. What's wrong? What hurts? Everything, Luffy managed to whisper before another wave of blood spilled from his lips, staining the deck crimson. It wasn't just physical pain, though that was overwhelming enough. The advanced Haki techniques he'd used, the Conqueror's coding that had pierced through Akainu's defenses, the internal destruction that had shattered Seastone, the sheer scope of power he'd channeled through his 17-year-old body, all of it was demanding payment. His muscles were tearing themselves apart from the inside. His bones felt like they were made of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. But worst of all was the sensation in his head, like someone had taken a red-hot poker and driven it directly into his brain. Haki exhaustion, came a new voice from across the deck. Severe overuse of advanced techniques. I've seen it before, but never this extreme. Everyone turned to see Trafalgar Law approaching, his katana resting casually on his shoulder. The Surgeon of Death had been among the pirates who joined the rescue operation, though he'd kept to the background during most of the battle. Law, Ace said urgently. Can you help him? Maybe. Law knelt beside Luffy, his trained eyes taking in the symptoms. But I need to understand what he did first. That level of Haki mastery shouldn't be possible at his age. The human body isn't designed to channel that much willpower. He's been hiding it, Zoro said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone look at him. All this time, everything we've been through. He's been holding back. What do you mean? Sanji demanded, his cigarette forgotten as he stared at their fallen captain. Think about it, Zoro continued, his expression grim. Every fight that nearly killed him, every time he pushed past his limits to save us. What if those weren't actually his limits? What if he was choosing to fight at partial strength because he was afraid of what he might become if he didn't? The implications hit the Straw Hat crew like a physical blow. All those desperate battles, Arlong, Crocodile, Lucci, Moria, had Luffy been capable of ending them quickly all along? Had he deliberately put himself through hell rather than show his true power? That's... Usopp's voice cracked. That's insane. Why would anyone do that? Because he was scared, Robin said softly, her eyes never leaving Luffy's pale face. Scared of becoming something we wouldn't recognize. Scared that if he showed us who he really was, we might not want to follow him anymore. Idiot, Nami whispered, tears streaming down her face. Stupid, self-sacrificing idiot. Room. Law's devil fruit power activated, creating a blue sphere around Luffy's body. I'm going to perform emergency surgery, but I need everyone to stay back. What I'm about to do isn't pretty. Surgery? Ace stepped forward, concern etched on his features. What's wrong with him? His Haki channels are burned out, Law explained, his hands already beginning to glow with surgical energy. Using advanced techniques without proper conditioning is like trying to run electrical current through wires that aren't thick enough to handle the load. They burn through. Is he going to be okay? Chopper asked, his medical training warring with his emotional attachment to his captain. I don't know, Law replied honestly. I've never treated Haki exhaustion this severe. The fact that he's still conscious is honestly miraculous. As Law worked, the rest of the Whitebeard pirates gave them space, though Ace remained close by. The Fire Fist was staring at his little brother with an expression of guilt and anguish that was painful to witness. This is my fault, he said quietly. If I hadn't taken Akainu's bait, if I hadn't charged at him like an idiot. Don't. The voice was barely a whisper, but it came from Luffy. Don't blame yourself for my choices. Luffy, you shouldn't be talking, Law warned. You need to conserve your strength. But Luffy ignored him, his golden eyes finding Ace's face. I chose to save you. I chose to fight Akainu. I chose to use power I'd been hiding for years. Those were my decisions, not yours. But if I'd just controlled myself, then he would have killed you anyway, just more efficiently. Luffy coughed, more blood spattering the deck. Akainu came here planning to murder you, Ace. He would have found a way no matter what. At least this way we both survived. Barely, Ace muttered. Barely is good enough. 3 hours later, Law finally stepped back from his patient, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool sea breeze. I've done what I can, he announced to the gathered crew. The immediate damage is stabilized, but his Haki channels are going to need time to heal. Weeks, maybe months. What does that mean? Sanji asked. It means no advanced techniques until he recovers. Basic Haki use only, and even that should be limited. If he pushes himself before he's fully healed, he could die, Robin finished quietly. Or worse. He could burn out his ability to use Haki permanently. The crew absorbed this information in stunned silence. Their captain, who had just proven himself capable of fighting admirals on equal terms, was now more vulnerable than he'd been since they first entered the Grand Line. How long will he be unconscious? Chopper asked. Hard to say. His body needs to reset itself, recalibrate his nervous system to handle the changes he's gone through. Could be hours, could be days. As if to prove Law wrong, Luffy's eyes fluttered open at that exact moment. He looked around at the concerned faces surrounding him, tried to sit up, and immediately collapsed back onto the makeshift stretcher. Stay down, Law ordered. You're in no condition to move. Where are we? Luffy asked, his voice hoarse. About 50 miles from Marineford, Marco replied from where he'd been standing guard. We're heading for one of our safe harbors to regroup. The crew, everyone's safe, Zoro assured him. Thanks to you, Luffy nodded, then seemed to remember something important. Akainu. Is he really? Dead, Ace confirmed grimly. You killed him, Luffy, one punch through the heart. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Luffy stared up at the sky for a long moment, processing the reality of what he'd done. I've never killed anyone before, he said finally. I know, Ace replied. None of us have, well, except maybe Zoro. Hey, the swordsman protested mildly. How does it feel? Luffy asked his brother. Knowing someone is dead because of you. Ace was quiet for a long moment. Heavy, he said finally, like carrying a stone in your chest that never goes away, but also necessary. Some people can't be reasoned with, can't be reformed, can't be allowed to keep hurting innocents. Akainu was one of those people. Doesn't make it easier. No, Ace agreed. It doesn't. Meanwhile, 500 miles away in the depths of Mariewa, the world government was in full crisis mode. The 5 elders sat around their ancient table, their faces grim as they processed reports from Marineford. Newspapers were already being printed with the impossible headline, "Admiral killed by rookie pirate." Emergency meetings were being called, damage control was beginning. "How do we spin this?" one of them asked. "We don't," replied another. "We bury it, kill the story, silence the witnesses, make it disappear." Impossible. There were 50,000 people there. The story's already spreading across every island in the Grand Line. Then we changed the narrative. Haki died heroically in battle against overwhelming odds. He took down dozens of pirates before falling. We make him a martyr instead of a victim. And the boy? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Monkey D. Luffy had just accomplished something no pirate had managed in decades, killing a Marine Admiral in single combat. His bounty would need to reflect that new reality. 5 billion berries, the eldest of the 5 elders said finally. Same as a Yonko, because that's what he is now, whether we acknowledge it or not. 5 billion for a 17-year-old. Age is irrelevant, power is what matters, and he's just proven he has enough power to kill our strongest fighters. More than that, he's shown the world that Marines can be beaten, that our system isn't invincible. Around the table, the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one dead admiral. This was about the fundamental challenge to their authority that Luffy represented. "We need contingency plans," another elder said, "if he continues growing at this rate, if he keeps inspiring others." "He won't live long enough," the first elder replied coldly. "I'll make sure of it." Back on the Moby Dick, Whitebeard had finally made his way to where Luffy lay recovering. The Yonko dismissed the others with a gesture, settling his massive frame beside the young pirate's stretcher. "How are you feeling, boy?" "Like I got hit by a Sea King," Luffy replied honestly. "Maybe 2 Sea Kings." "Gururara, that's what happens when you push your body beyond its limits. I did the same thing when I was young. Took years to learn proper restraint." "Did you regret it, the first time you killed someone?" Whitebeard was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with old memories. "Yes," he said finally. "For years, I regretted it. Wondered if there had been another way, if I could have found a solution that didn't require taking a life." What changed? Time, experience, understanding that in this world, sometimes the only choice is between being a killer or watching good people die. Haki would have murdered your brother, then gone on to murder countless others in the name of his twisted justice. You stopped that. But I also became something I never wanted to be. "No," Whitebeard said firmly. "You became what the world needed you to be. There's a difference." Luffy considered this, his golden eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun. Ace said killing someone changes you, that it leaves marks on your soul. It does. But scars aren't always bad things, boy. Sometimes they remind us of battles we survived, prices we paid to protect what mattered most. What if my crew can't accept what I've become? What if they decide they don't want to follow someone who's capable of murder? Whitebeard glanced around at the Straw Hat Pirates, who were doing their best to look like they weren't eavesdropping on the conversation. "Look at them," he said gently. "Really look at them. Do they look like people who are planning to abandon you?" Luffy followed his gaze, seeing Zoro standing guard despite his own injuries, Sanji preparing something that smelled like medicine and hope, Chopper fussing over medical supplies, Nami plotting their course to safety, Robin reading but keeping one eye on him, Usopp cleaning his weapons with nervous energy. His crew, his family, still here, still watching over him, still ready to follow him into hell if necessary. "They're idiots," Luffy said softly, but there was profound affection in his voice. "The best crews usually are," Whitebeard agreed. "Reasonable people don't follow dreamers into impossible situations. It takes a special kind of madness to believe in someone else's vision of a better world." "What happens now?" Luffy asked. "What do we do with a world where everyone knows Marines can be killed?" "We sail forward," Whitebeard replied simply. "We find our dreams, we protect our families, and we let the world change around us. Because it will change, boy. What you did today, it's going to ripple across every ocean, inspire people who thought they were powerless, terrify those who thought they were untouchable. That's a lot of responsibility. Welcome to being a Yonko," Whitebeard said with a laugh. "Because that's what you are now, whether you want the title or not. You've proven you can stand toe-to-toe with the strongest forces in the world. The question is, what kind of emperor will you be?" Before Luffy could answer, a messenger bird landed on the ship's railing, a newspaper clutched in its talons. Marco retrieved it, his eyes widening as he read the headlines. "Pops," he called out, his voice tense. "You need to see this." Whitebeard took the paper, and even his legendary composure cracked slightly as he read. "Impossible victory Atmarineford Admiral aka Inu slain by rookie pirate bounty raised to 5 billion berries, 5 billion." Whitebeard muttered. "They're not taking any chances." "Is that bad?" Luffy asked weakly. "It's unprecedented. The highest bounty in recorded history for someone your age, but more than that, it's a declaration of war. The world government is telling everyone that you're now considered a threat equal to the Yonko." Around them, the crew absorbed this information with varying degrees of shock and concern. Their captain had gone from 300 million berries to 5 billion in a single afternoon. He was now officially one of the most dangerous people in the world. "Well," Zoro said finally, his voice carrying that familiar note of grim satisfaction, "at least now everyone knows not to underestimate us." "This changes everything," Nami said, her navigator's mind already calculating the implications. "Every marine base, every bounty hunter, every rival crew, they'll all be gunning for us now." "Let them come," Sanji said, lighting a fresh cigarette. "They'll learn the same lesson Akainu did," but Luffy wasn't listening to the tactical discussions. His attention was fixed on something else entirely, a small article buried on the newspaper's third page. Mysterious figure spotted Marineford witnesses report blonde revolutionary with striking resemblance to deceased noble. The article was only a few lines long, probably dismissed by most readers as unimportant. But Luffy's enhanced observation Haki, even weakened by his injuries, had caught something in the words that made his heart race. Blonde revolutionary, deceased noble, striking resemblance. "Sabo," he whispered. "What?" Ace leaned closer, following his gaze to the newspaper. "Nothing," Luffy said quickly, his mind racing. "Probably nothing." But as the Moby Dick sailed toward safety, as his crew fussed over his injuries and planned for an uncertain future, Luffy couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. He'd killed an admiral. He'd gained a bounty that marked him as one of the most dangerous people alive. He'd shown the world that the Marines weren't invincible. But maybe, just maybe, he'd also gained something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. The news of Admiral Akainu's death spread across the world like wildfire, carried by news coup to every corner of every ocean. But it wasn't just the newspapers that carried the story. Transponder snails crackled with urgent conversations, merchant ships spread rumors from port to port. And within hours, every major power in the world was scrambling to understand what Monkey D. Luffy's impossible victory meant for the balance of everything. On Whole Cake Island, Charlotte Linlin was in the middle of her afternoon tea party when the news arrived. The towering Yonko had been enjoying a peaceful moment with her homies, discussing wedding plans and territory expansions, when Prospero burst into the room with a newspaper clutched in his candy-coated hands. "Mama," he called out, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "You need to see this." Big Mom's eyes, usually cheerful during tea time, narrowed as she read the headline. For a moment, the only sound in the massive dining hall was the ticking of her hat, King Baum, as he processed the information alongside her. "Mama." Big Mom's laughter started low but quickly grew to its signature volume, shaking the very foundations of her castle. "An admiral, a marine admiral killed by a 17-year-old boy. What should we do, Mama?" Prospero asked, his usual confidence shaken. "If this straw hat can kill admirals, we recruit him," Big Mom declared, slamming her massive fist on the table and sending teacups flying. "Or we kill him before he becomes a bigger problem. A boy who can take down Akainu, Mama, he'd make a perfect son-in-law." Around the table, her children exchanged worried glances. They'd seen their mother's obsessions before, and they never ended well for anyone involved. 3,000 miles away, on the floating island of Onigashima, a very different conversation was taking place. Kaido of the Beast stood atop his fortress, staring out at the stormy sky with an expression of pure, savage joy. The newspaper in his massive hands was already crumpled from his grip, but the words were burned into his memory. "Finally," he rumbled, his voice carrying across the island despite being barely above a whisper. "Finally, someone interesting." "Governor Kaido," King ventured from behind him, his masked face betraying no emotion. "How should we respond to this development?" "Respond?" Kaido turned, and his subordinates took an involuntary step back at the manic light in his eyes. "We're going to find this Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to fight him." "Really fight him? No holding back, no playing around. I want to see if he's strong enough to give me the death I've been searching for." "Sir," Queen interjected nervously, "he just fought a war." "He's likely weakened, recovering." Kaido's glare cut him off mid-sentence. "Weakened? He killed Sakazuki. Do you think someone capable of that is ever truly weak?" The Yonko's grin was terrifying. "No, this boy has awakened something that's been sleeping in him, and I want to be the one to test its limits." He raised his kanabo, the massive club crackling with conquerors' Haki. Prepare the ships. We're going hunting. But not all reactions to the news were filled with violence and ambition. On a small island in the New World, red-haired Shanks sat in his usual tavern, staring at the newspaper with an expression of deep concern. Boss, Ben Beckman approached cautiously, recognizing the look on his captain's face. Something wrong? Everything, Shanks replied quietly. Everything is wrong with this. He held up the newspaper, pointing to the grainy photograph of Luffy standing over Akainu's body. Even in the poor quality image, the change in the young pirate was visible. The golden eyes, the aura of barely contained power, the weight of someone who'd crossed a line they could never uncross. He was supposed to stay innocent longer, Shanks continued, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. The hat, the promise, Roger's will, all of it was meant to guide him toward becoming the kind of pirate king who could change the world through joy, not violence. Maybe he still can, Lucky Roo offered, though his usual cheerfulness was muted. Can he? Shanks asked. Look at his eyes in that photo, Roo. Those are the eyes of someone who's learned that sometimes the only solution is to remove the problem permanently. That's not the same boy I gave Roger's hat to. Beckman took a long drag from his cigarette. People change, boss, especially when the world forces them to. That's what I'm afraid of, Shanks replied. Roger changed too near the end. The weight of what he'd learned, what he'd had to do to reach Laugh Tale, it changed him from the laughing adventurer I knew into someone harder, more focused. Someone willing to sacrifice himself for a greater cause. He stood up, his hand instinctively moving to touch the 3 scars Blackbeard had given him years ago. I can feel it starting already, the shift in the world's balance. Luffy's victory today isn't just going to affect the Marines, it's going to inspire every revolutionary, every dreamer, every person who's been oppressed by the world government's version of justice. That's a good thing, isn't it? Yasopp asked from across the room. Maybe, or maybe it's going to start a war that makes Marineford look like a minor skirmish. Shanks folded the newspaper carefully, his expression grim. Either way, I need to see him. I need to understand what he's become, and whether Roger's will is still burning inside him, or if it's been consumed by something darker. In a hidden base somewhere in the Grand Line, Monkey D. Dragon stood before a massive map of the world, red pins marking every location where Revolutionary Army cells were active. The newspaper lay forgotten on his desk behind him, but its contents had already reshaped his understanding of global politics. Sir, Koala ventured from the doorway, her voice careful. The commanders are asking for orders. Luffy's victory has inspired uprisings on 12 different islands. The people are demanding action. Dragon didn't turn around. And what do you think I should tell them? That we support them, that we're ready to move against the world government while they're reeling from Akainu's death, and get thousands of our people killed in premature attacks. Dragon's voice was cold, analytical. Luffy's victory was impressive, but it was also personal. One boy saving his brother isn't the same as organized revolution against a global system. But the psychological impact will fade, Dragon interrupted, unless it's backed up by sustained action. The world government will adapt, restructure, find new ways to maintain control. They've survived worse challenges than one dead admiral. Koala stepped into the room fully, her expression concerned. You don't sound proud of your son. For the first time, Dragon turned around, and Koala was shocked by the complexity of emotions on his usually stoic face. Pride, worry, fear, and something that might have been guilt all warred for dominance. I'm terrified of my son, he said quietly. Do you know what it means to kill an admiral at 17? It means he's capable of violence I couldn't imagine at twice his age. It means the innocent boy who declared he'd be Pirate King has learned that sometimes dreams require blood. He picked up the newspaper, staring at the photograph of Luffy. I left Luffy with Garp because I thought it would keep him safe, keep him away from the darkness that comes with fighting the world government. Instead, I may have created something even more dangerous than myself. Sir, a revolutionary with the power of a Yonko and no institutional restraints, Dragon explained. Someone who can change the world through pure force of will without needing to consider the political consequences. That kind of power, in the hands of someone who's just learned that killing is sometimes necessary. He trailed off, but Koala understood. An organized revolution could be negotiated with, reasoned with, potentially controlled. But a force of nature like Luffy, operating according to his own moral code and backed by unimaginable power. That was something entirely different. Should we make contact? She asked. Dragon was quiet for a long moment. Not yet. Let's see what he does with this new knowledge first. Let's see if he becomes a liberator or a conqueror. but perhaps the most significant reaction came from the heart of world power itself. In the depths of Marineford, beneath Pangea Castle, in a room that didn't officially exist, a figure sat in shadow reviewing reports from across the globe. "I am the secret ruler of the world government, the person who truly decided the fate of nations," was not pleased. Haki knew was useful, they mused to themselves, their voice carrying an authority that made the air itself seem heavy. Brutal, efficient, utterly committed to maintaining the status quo, his death is inconvenient. A den mushy on the ancient desk crackled to life. "My lord," came the voice of one of the 5 elders, "we've received reports from our intelligence networks. The reaction to Haki death is significant. Elaborate. 17 islands have declared independence from world government protection. 3 member nations are questioning their tribute payments. The Revolutionary Army is mobilizing on multiple fronts, and," the elder paused, "several of our own marine bases are reporting morale issues." I was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Then, surprisingly, they began to laugh. Not the maniacal laughter of madness, but the cold amusement of someone who'd seen this pattern before. "Of course," they said finally. "A martyr is often more dangerous than a living enemy. Haki's death isn't just a military loss, it's become a symbol." "What are your orders, my lord?" "Begin Operation Cleansing Light," I replied without hesitation. "Target every known revolutionary base simultaneously. Eliminate the leaders, scatter the followers. Make it clear that challenging our authority has consequences that extend far beyond the individual." And Monkey D. Luffy, IM's expression, hidden in shadow, became contemplative. "Declare him an enemy of humanity. Maximum bounty, kill on-site orders for all Marines. But more than that, activate the Special Science Group's newest project. It's time to field test our Admiral replacement program." "Sir, are you certain? The subjects are still experimental, desperate times," I replied simply. "This Monkey D. Luffy has proven that our current forces aren't sufficient. If traditional Marines can't handle threats of this magnitude, then we'll create ones that can." The connection ended, leaving I alone in the darkness with their thoughts. On the desk before them, among various reports and intelligence files, sat a collection of wanted posters. At the top of the pile, with a bounty that dwarfed all the others, was a photograph of a 17-year-old boy with golden eyes and a straw hat. "You're not the first to kill one of our admirals," I whispered to the image. "And like all the others, you'll learn that the world government has resources you can't possibly imagine. The question is whether you'll be wise enough to disappear before we're forced to deploy them." They stood up, moving to a massive window that looked out over the red line. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the boy who just changed the world was recovering from his first taste of real power. Soon, he'd have to learn what it meant to be truly hunted. 800 years, I continued, their voice carrying the weight of centuries. 800 years of maintaining order, of preventing chaos, of ensuring that the world remains stable under our guidance. I won't let one overpowered child undo all of that work. They pressed a button on their desk, and throughout Marineford, alarms began to sound. Not emergency alarms, these were different, older, carrying the resonance of authority that hadn't been used in decades. The call to total war. Meanwhile, on the Moby Dick, Luffy was blissfully unaware of the global storm his actions had unleashed. He lay on his stretcher, still weak from Haki exhaustion, listening to his crew argue about their next move. "We need to lay low," Nami was saying, her navigator's pragmatism warring with her loyalty. "Every Marine in the world is going to be hunting us now. We should find somewhere safe to hide until Luffy recovers." "Hide," Zoro's voice carried its familiar note of disdain. "Since when do we hide from anyone?" "Since our captain got a bounty that makes him one of the most wanted men in history," Nami shot back. "Do you have any idea what 5 billion berries means? That's not just dangerous pirate money, that's reshape the world order money." "Good," Sanji said, lighting a fresh cigarette. "About time the world took us seriously." "This isn't a joke," Nami exploded. "They're going to send everything they have after us. Admiral-level fighters, Cypher Paul assassins, maybe even—" "Let them come," Luffy interrupted quietly, his voice carrying despite his weakness. "I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding what I can do. If they want a fight, they can have one." The crew turned to look at him, and for the first time since the battle, they saw something familiar in his eyes. Not the hollow shock of someone who'd killed for the first time, but the determined fire of their captain making a decision. "You sure about that?" Ace asked, concern evident in his voice. "Because this isn't just about you anymore, little brother. You've got a crew to think about, friends who could get hurt because of the enemies you've made." Then I'll protect them, Luffy replied simply. The same way I protected you. Whatever it takes. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. His crew, his brother, even the Whitebeard pirates, they all heard the same thing in his voice. The innocence was gone, burned away in the fires of Marineford. In its place was something harder, more focused, infinitely more dangerous. Monkey D. Luffy had learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the kind of person others fear. And the world was about to learn what that meant. Well then, Robin said quietly, her voice carrying a note of dark amusement, I suppose we'd better get ready for war. Outside the ship, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. But for the first time since leaving Marineford, Luffy found himself looking forward to what came next. He'd spent 12 years afraid of his own power. Now, finally, he was ready to see what he could really do with it. The world had declared him an enemy of humanity. Time to show them what humanity's enemy was capable of. 2 days after the battle at Marineford, Luffy finally felt strong enough to sit up without the world spinning around him. The Moby Dick had found refuge in a hidden cove among the Sabyati Archipelago's mangroves, the massive trees providing natural cover from marine surveillance. Easy there, Chopper fussed as Luffy struggled to swing his legs over the side of his makeshift bed. Your Haki channels are still healing. Too much movement could cause internal bleeding. I'm fine, Luffy insisted, though the way he winced when he moved suggested otherwise. I need to talk to Ace. His brother was sitting on the deck's edge, staring out at the calm water with an expression Luffy couldn't quite read. There was something different about Ace now, not just relief at being alive, but a weight he hadn't carried before. The weight of knowing someone had died because of him, even if that someone had deserved it. Hey, Luffy said, settling down beside him with careful movements. Hey yourself. Ace glanced over, taking in his brother's pale complexion and the dark circles under his eyes. You look like hell, feel like it too. Luffy managed a weak grin. Worth it though. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the Straw Hat crew go about their business on the other side of the deck. Zoro was exercising despite his own injuries, because of course he was. Sanji was arguing with someone about meal preparations. Nami was bent over charts, probably calculating their next move with her usual precision. Normal, they were trying to act normal even though everything had changed. I've been thinking, Ace said finally. That's dangerous, Ace snorted. Shut up, I'm serious. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Whitebeard wants me to stay with the crew, help them recover from the losses we took at Marineford. And normally I would. They're my family, my responsibility. But you're my family too. My little brother who just turned the world upside down to save my ass. Ace's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. And I keep thinking, what if you'd failed? What if that last attack hadn't worked, if Akainu had been just a little faster or stronger or luckier? I would have died never knowing who you really were. Luffy looked at him sideways. What do you mean? Come on, Luffy. You think I'm stupid? I've been putting pieces together for 2 days now. Ace's expression was serious, concerned. The way you moved at Marineford, the techniques you used, the sheer level of power you displayed, that doesn't happen overnight. You've been hiding this for years. There was no accusation in his voice, just hurt. The hurt of realizing that his little brother hadn't trusted him with the truth. Yeah, Luffy said quietly. I have. Why? The question Luffy had been dreading. How could he explain 12 years of fear, of carefully maintained control, of nights spent awake wondering if the monster inside him would eventually consume everything he cared about? Remember when Sabo died? He asked instead. Ace flinched. Of course. I saw it happen. Through my observation Haki, I saw everything. The cannonball hitting his boat, his body sinking under the water the moment his life force just stopped. Luffy's hands clenched into fists, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was too weak, too far away, too useless. Luffy, that's when it started, the real training I mean. Not just getting stronger, but learning to control what I could do so I'd never feel that helpless again. Luffy's voice was flat, emotionless. Problem was, the stronger I got, the more dangerous I became. And I started having these dreams. What kind of dreams? Nightmares, really. Dreams where I'd lose control, where my power would hurt the people I was trying to protect. Dreams where you and Sabo would look at me with fear instead of love because I'd become something monstrous. Ace was quiet for a long moment, processing this. So you decided to hide it. I decided to be normal. To let you both think I was just the clumsy little brother who needed protection. It seemed safer. For who, us or you? The question cut deeper than any physical wound. I don't know anymore, Luffy admitted. Maybe both. Ace leaned back against the ship's railing, his expression thoughtful. You know what's funny? All these years, I thought I was the one protecting you, making sure you didn't get in over your head, keeping you safe from the worst parts of the world. And the whole time, you were protecting me, Luffy said firmly. Just not the way you thought. You and Sabo, you gave me something to hold on to when the power felt like it was going to consume everything. You reminded me who I wanted to be, even when I was scared of what I might become. But it changed anyway, didn't it? At Marineford, when you killed Akainu, that wasn't the little brother I remember. Luffy was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally, it wasn't. That was someone who'd learned that sometimes. Protecting your family means becoming something they might not recognize. And are you okay with that? Another pause. I don't know. Ask me in a few years when I've figured out how to live with it. I want to come with you. The words came out of nowhere, startling both brothers out of their contemplative silence. What? Luffy blinked at Ace in confusion. When you leave here, when you head back out into the world, I want to come with you, at least for a while. Ace's voice was firm, decided. You said you've been hiding who you really are for 12 years. Well, I want to know who my little brother actually is, not the mask he's been wearing. Ace, Luffy looked torn between hope and concern. What about Whitebeard? What about your crew? They'll understand. Pops especially, he knows how important family is. Ace's smile was sad but determined. Besides, after what happened at Marineford, after seeing what you're capable of, I think you're going to need someone watching your back who really knows you. I have a crew for that. You have a crew who loves you, Ace corrected, but they don't know the weight you've been carrying all these years. They don't understand what it's like to have power that could destroy everything you care about if you lose control for even a second. He had a point. As much as Luffy loved his crew, as much as they'd proven their loyalty over and over again, there were some things that only family could understand. Some burdens that could only be shared with people who'd known you before you became who the world needed you to be. What would you do? Luffy asked. I mean, if you came with us. You're not really the take orders from your little brother type. Ace grinned, and for a moment he looked like the carefree older brother Luffy remembered from their childhood. Who said anything about taking orders? I was thinking more like consultant, someone to help you figure out how to use all that power without losing yourself in the process. You know how to do that. I know how to not do it, Ace replied, his expression growing more serious. I've seen what happens when people with our kind of strength let the power go to their heads. Whitebeard's told me stories about pirates who started out wanting to protect people and ended up becoming the very thing they originally fought against. Before Luffy could respond, a familiar voice interrupted their conversation. Gyururara having a family meeting without the old man. They turned to see Whitebeard approaching, his massive frame moving with surprising quiet across the deck. Despite his size, he settled down near them with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to control his tremendous strength. We were just talking, Ace said, though there was a guilty note in his voice. About you leaving with your brother, Whitebeard said matter-of-factly. Don't look so surprised, Ace. You think I didn't notice you packing your things this morning? Ace had the grace to look embarrassed. Pops, I can explain. No need. Whitebeard's expression was understanding, even fond. A man has to follow his heart, especially when it comes to family, and your heart's been divided ever since you got the news about your brother's execution. I don't want to abandon the crew. You're not abandoning anyone, Whitebeard interrupted gently. You're choosing to help your brother learn how to carry the burden he's taken on. That's exactly what a good older brother should do. He turned his attention to Luffy, studying the young pirate with those sharp eyes that had seen decades of rise and fall in the new world. You're going to need all the help you can get, boy. What you did at Marineford killing Akainu, showing the world that Marines can be beaten, that's going to have consequences you can't even imagine yet. What kind of consequences? Luffy asked. Every kind, political, military, personal. Whitebeard's expression was grim. The world government doesn't forgive threats to their authority, and you've just proven yourself to be the biggest threat they've faced in decades. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Let them come. It's not that simple, Whitebeard continued. They won't just send Marines after you, they'll target your crew, your allies, anyone who's ever helped you. They'll make examples of innocent people just to prove that crossing them has consequences. The words hit Luffy like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on the immediate aftermath of the battle that he hadn't fully considered the broader implications. How many people might suffer because of his actions? How many innocents would pay the price for his decision to kill Akainu? Hey, Ace's hand landed on his shoulder, grounding him. Don't go down that path. You can't take responsibility for every bad thing the world government does in response to your actions. They've been hurting innocent people for centuries. That's on them, not you. But if you hadn't killed Akainu, he would have murdered me, then gone on to kill countless others in the name of his twisted justice, Ace said firmly. You saved lives, Luffy, maybe not in the obvious way, but you stopped one of the most dangerous men in the world from continuing his campaign of terror. Your brother's right, Whitebeard agreed. But he's also right about you needing help. The kind of power you displayed at Marineford, that's Yonko-level strength, but you don't have a Yonko's experience or support network. You're going to make mistakes, and in the new world, mistakes get people killed. So what do you suggest? Luffy asked. Take Ace with you, Whitebeard said simply. Let him teach you what I've taught him about carrying the weight of real power. Learn how to be strong without losing your humanity in the process. And what about your crew? Can you afford to lose someone like Ace? Whitebeard's laugh boomed across the cove. Gyururara, you think this is permanent. Ace will come back to us when he's done helping you become the man you need to be. Family bonds aren't broken by temporary separations. He stood up, his massive shadow falling across both brothers. Besides, I have a feeling our paths will cross again soon enough. The new world is a smaller place than most people realize, especially for those of us who operate at the top of the food chain. 3 hours later, after what felt like endless discussions and preparations, Ace stood before the assembled Whitebeard pirates with his belongings packed in a small bag over his shoulder. This isn't goodbye, he told them, his voice carrying across the deck. This is temporary reassignment. My little brother needs help figuring out how to be a Yonko without losing himself in the process, and apparently I'm the best person for the job. Take care of yourself, Fire Fist, Marco called out, his usual easy smile tinged with concern. And take care of your brother too. The whole world's going to be gunning for him now. I know, Ace's expression was determined. That's why he needs family watching his back. The goodbyes were brief but heartfelt. These people had been Ace's family for years, and leaving them, even temporarily, wasn't easy. But as he walked across the gangplank to the Thousand Sunny, he knew he was making the right choice. His little brother had spent 12 years hiding who he really was, and now that the truth was out, he was going to need help learning how to live with it. Welcome aboard, Luffy said with a grin that looked almost normal. Hope you're ready for things to get weird. Weirder than sailing with a crew that includes a talking reindeer and a skeleton who drinks milk, Ace shot back. Oh, you have no idea. As the Thousand Sunny prepared to set sail, as the crew made final preparations for their departure from the relative safety of the hidden cove, Luffy found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete honesty. For the first time since Sabo's death, he was surrounded by people who knew exactly who and what he was. No more hiding, no more careful control of his reactions, no more pretending to be weaker than he actually was. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. So, Ace said, settling into his temporary quarters, what's the plan? Where are we heading first? Fishman Island, Luffy replied. We promised we'd visit, and I always keep my promises. Even the dangerous ones, Luffy's smile turned sharp, predatory. Especially the dangerous ones. As the Sunny sailed out of the cove and into open water, as they left the protection of Whitebeard's territory and entered the vast uncertainty of the new world, Ace found himself thinking about power and responsibility, about the weight of family bonds, and the price of protecting the people you love. His little brother had killed a man to save him, had revealed power he'd been hiding for over a decade, had become something the entire world now feared and respected in equal measure. But underneath all of that, underneath the golden eyes and the aura of barely contained strength, he was still Luffy. Still the boy who declared he would become Pirate King with absolute certainty, still someone who would sacrifice anything to protect his family. Hey Luffy, Ace said as they watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of red and gold. Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did at Marineford, the choice you made, it couldn't have been easy. Luffy was quiet for a long moment. It wasn't, he said finally, but I'd do it again, every time without hesitation. I know you would, that's what makes you different from the monsters we fight. What do you mean? Monsters kill because they enjoy it, or because it's convenient, or because they don't see other people as worth considering, Ace explained. You killed because it was the only way to protect someone you loved. That's not the same thing. Doesn't feel different. It will, eventually. The guilt fades, but the reason remains. And as long as you remember the reason, as long as protecting people stays more important than the power itself, you'll be okay. As night fell over the new world, as the Thousand Sunny sailed toward whatever challenges awaited them, Monkey D. Luffy found himself believing, for the first time since Marineford, that his brother might be right. The world had changed. He had changed. But maybe, with the right people watching his back, that change didn't have to mean losing himself entirely. Family bonds, after all, were stronger than any power, even the power to reshape the world. 6 weeks had passed since Marineford, and the Thousand Sunny was finally approaching the entrance to Fishman Island. The journey through the new world had been different this time, not because of the dangers they'd faced, but because of how they'd handled them. 3 separate marine ambushes had been dealt with before they could properly form up. A Sea King the size of a warship had been convinced to leave through what Luffy generously called negotiation, but looked more like controlled intimidation. Even the weather seemed less threatening, as if the new world itself recognized that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. "Contact ahead," Usopp called from the crow's nest. "Looks like a delegation." Indeed, as the Sunny crested the final wave before Fishman Island's entrance, they found themselves facing an impressive welcoming committee. King Neptune himself rode at the head of a formation of seahorse cavalry, with Jinbei beside him and Princess Shirahoshi visible in the distance, her massive form unmistakable even at this range. "That's quite a reception," Robin observed, lowering her spyglass. "They're scared," Luffy said quietly, his observation Haki reading the emotional undercurrents of the approaching delegation. "Not of us specifically, but of what we represent, what we might bring with us." It was true. News of Akainu's death had spread even to the depths of the ocean, and with it came the understanding that the Straw Hat Pirates were no longer just another crew of promising rookies. They were a force that had fundamentally altered the world's power structure, and that made them both valuable allies and dangerous enemies. "Your Majesty," Jinbei called out as the 2 groups came within speaking distance, "welcome to Fishman Island. Though I must ask, are you here as friends, or should we prepare for another Marineford?" The question stung, but Luffy understood it. His actions had consequences beyond just killing an admiral. Every ruler in the world was now wondering if he might decide their government needed changing too. "Just friends," Luffy replied, and something in his voice, the same absolute authority that had stopped an execution, made Neptune visibly relax. "I keep my promises and I promise to visit." "Then you are most welcome," Neptune said formally, "though I hope you'll understand if we're cautious about the nature of your visit." "Of course." Ace stepped forward, and Luffy noticed how naturally his brother had slipped into the role of diplomat. "We're here to rest, resupply, and visit with friends, nothing more." The formalities took another hour, but eventually the Sunny was granted passage to the island proper. As they descended through the bubble coating, as the impossible sight of Fishman Island spread out below them, Luffy found himself thinking about how different this felt from their first visit. Then they'd been desperate refugees fleeing from powerful enemies. Now they were the powerful force that others might need to flee from. "Weird, isn't it?" Ace said, appearing beside him at the railing. "What?" "Being on the other side of it. Being the ones people are afraid of instead of the ones running scared." Luffy nodded slowly. "I don't like it." "Good. The day you start enjoying fear is the day you become the kind of person we used to fight against." The celebration that night was smaller than their first visit to Fishman Island, but somehow more meaningful. Instead of a massive public feast, Neptune had arranged a private dinner with just the royal family and a few close friends. The conversation was easier, more relaxed, without the pressure of performing for thousands of onlookers. "So," Princess Shirahoshi said shyly, her massive form curled up to make conversation easier, "is it true that you fought all 3 admirals at once?" "No," Luffy laughed, and for a moment he sounded like his old self. "Just one. Though that was plenty. The stories have grown in the telling," Jinbei observed with a slight smile. "By some accounts, you single-handedly defeated the entire marine force while juggling flaming swords and riding a Sea King." "That would have been cooler," Luffy admitted, which made even the normally serious merman guards chuckle. But as the evening progressed, as the conversation flowed around topics both serious and mundane, Luffy found himself studying the faces around the table. These people were his friends, people he'd bled to protect, but there was something different in how they looked at him now. Not fear exactly, but a kind of careful respect that hadn't been there before. He was still their friend. But he was also someone who had killed an admiral with his bare hands, and that changed things whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. "Luffy-kun," Shirahoshi ventured during a lull in conversation, "may I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you regret it, what you did at Marineford?" The question silenced the entire table. Even the servants stopped moving, waiting for his answer. Luffy was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting the soft light of the underwater palace. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, thoughtful. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I regret that the world is set up in a way that sometimes the only solution to a problem is to remove it permanently." But do I regret saving my brother? Do I regret stopping someone who would have gone on to hurt countless innocent people? He shook his head. No, I don't regret that. Even knowing what it's cost you, Neptune asked gently, what has it cost me? Your innocence. Your ability to solve problems without violence, the simple joy you used to take in adventure. The king's voice was compassionate but honest. You're not the same person who first visited our island, Luffy-kun. That much is obvious to anyone with eyes. Luffy considered this seriously. No, he agreed finally. I'm not, but maybe that person was never going to be strong enough to protect the people he cared about. Maybe losing some innocence was the price of gaining the power to actually make a difference. And are you comfortable with who you've become? Another long pause. Around the table, his crew watched him with expressions of love and concern. They'd been asking themselves the same question for weeks, wondering if their captain was still the person they'd chosen to follow. I'm learning to be, Luffy said finally. With help. He glanced at Ace, who nodded encouragingly. Over the past 6 weeks, his brother had been exactly what he'd promised, a guide through the complicated process of accepting power without losing himself to it. Not through lectures or dramatic interventions, but through quiet conversations and patient understanding. The thing is, Luffy continued, I spent so long afraid of what I might become that I never really thought about who I wanted to be. I just knew I didn't want to be a monster. But Ace has been helping me understand that there's a difference between being capable of monstrous things and actually being a monster. What's the difference? Shirahoshi asked. Monsters hurt people because they can, or because it's fun, or because they don't see other people as worth considering, Luffy replied, echoing his brother's words from weeks earlier. I hurt someone because it was the only way to stop him from hurting the people I love. That doesn't make it good, but it doesn't make me a monster either. And going forward, Neptune asked, what kind of pirate king do you intend to be? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone at the table, his crew, his hosts, even Ace, was waiting to hear his answer. The kind who protects people, Luffy said simply. The kind who fights for freedom, not just for himself, but for everyone who's been crushed under systems they can't escape. The kind who uses his power to make the world a little bit better, even if it's messy and complicated and sometimes requires doing things I'd rather not do. He paused, his expression growing more serious. The world government has had 800 years to prove they can rule justly. 800 years to show that their version of peace is worth the suffering it requires. And all they've given us is slavery, oppression, and the systematic destruction of anyone who dares to dream of something better. So you're declaring war on them? No, Luffy said, and there was something final in his voice. I'm declaring that their time is over. That the age of people being afraid to dream, afraid to stand up for themselves, afraid to believe things can be better, that age is ending. And what replaces it? Luffy smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it looked completely natural. Freedom, real freedom, not just the kind you can buy or fight for temporarily. The freedom to chase your dreams without worrying about some distant authority deciding you don't deserve them. That's a nice dream, Jinbei said gently. But dreams and reality are different things. The world government has resources you can't imagine, weapons that make admirals look like children. They've survived challenges before. Not from me, they haven't. The simple confidence in those words made everyone at the table sit back slightly. This wasn't boasting or bravado, it was the calm certainty of someone who had looked into the abyss of absolute power and decided he was strong enough to change it. Besides, Luffy continued, his smile widening, I don't have to do it alone. That's what crews are for, right? Around the table, his nakama nodded with various degrees of determination and insanity. Zoro looked eager for the challenge. Sanji was already planning how to cook for a revolution. Nami was probably calculating the cost of overthrowing a world government. Robin's smile held dark promise. Even Chopper looked ready to provide medical support for the impossible. And Ace was grinning with the same wild joy he'd shown as a child, when the three brothers had declared war on the world from their treehouse in the forest. Well then, Neptune said finally, raising his cup in a toast, to the dawn of a new era. May it be kinder than the one it replaces. To freedom, Luffy replied, raising his own cup. To family, Ace added. To the dream, the rest of the crew chorused. Later that night, after the formal dinner had ended and most of the crew had retired to their quarters, Luffy found himself standing on the palace balcony, looking out at the lights of Fishman Island spread below. Can't sleep? Ace asked, joining him at the railing. Too much thinking, Luffy replied. Weird how killing one person can make you think about everything else. That's normal. Taking a life, even when it's justified, makes you reevaluate what really matters. Ace was quiet for a moment. You did good tonight, you know, at dinner. You sounded like someone who knows who he is and what he stands for. Do I? Know who I am, I mean? Ace studied his brother's profile in the soft underwater light. I think you're figuring it out, and I think the person you're becoming is someone Sabo would be proud of. The name hit Luffy like a physical blow. They'd barely talked about their dead brother since leaving Marineford, the wound still too fresh, the guilt too sharp. Would he, Luffy asked quietly, would he be proud of someone who solved problems by killing people? He'd be proud of someone who used his strength to protect the weak, Ace replied firmly. He'd be proud of someone who looked at an unjust system and decided to tear it down instead of working within it. And he'd be proud of someone who never forgot that power without compassion is just tyranny with better intentions. I miss him. Me too. Every day, Ace's voice was soft with old pain, but I think maybe he's still with us in a way. In the dreams we're chasing, the people we're protecting, the world we're trying to build. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two brothers contemplating the impossible task ahead of them. Somewhere in the distance, a whale song echoed through the water, haunting and beautiful. Hey, Ace, Luffy said eventually. Yeah, thanks for coming with me, for helping me figure this out. I don't think I could have done it alone. You wouldn't have had to, Ace replied. That's what family is for. We carry the weight together, share the burden so no one has to bear it alone. Even when the burden is reshaping the world, especially then. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A messenger arrived at dawn with a newspaper that made everyone who read it go very quiet indeed. World government declares total war, new Admiral-class weapons deployed, Monkey D. Luffy must be stopped at all costs. The article was short but devastating. The world government wasn't just hunting them anymore, they were mobilizing everything they had. New weapons, experimental technologies, alliance with previously neutral nations. They were treating Luffy not as a criminal to be captured, but as an existential threat to be eliminated. Well, Zoro said after reading the article twice, at least we know where we stand. This changes our timeline, Nami said, her navigator's mind already working on the implications. We were planning to take our time, build our strength gradually, but if they're coming at us with everything, then we meet them head-on, Luffy said simply. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than we are. They want a war. Fine, let's give them one they'll never forget. You sure about this? Robin asked quietly. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. We'll be committed to a path that ends with either our victory or our deaths. Luffy looked around at his crew, his family, and saw the same determination reflected in every face. They'd followed him this far through impossible battles and dangerous dreams. They'd follow him to the end of the world if necessary. I'm sure, he said, the world government has had 800 years to prove they can rule justly. Time's up. He stood up, and something in his posture made everyone in the room take notice. This wasn't the cheerful pirate captain making a reckless decision. This was someone who had looked into the face of absolute power and decided he was strong enough to change everything. Nami, plot a course for the surface. We're done hiding in the depths. Where are we going? She asked. Luffy's smile was sharp, predatory, filled with the kind of dangerous joy that had once made him declare war on the world government for the sake of a single crew member. Everywhere, we're going to visit every island, every kingdom, every place where people have been crushed under the weight of systems they can't escape. And we're going to give them something they've been missing for 800 years. What's that? Hope. Real hope backed by the power to make it reality. As the Thousand Sunny prepared to leave Fishman Island, as the crew made ready for a war that would reshape the world, Monkey D. Luffy stood at the bow and looked toward the surface. Somewhere up there, beyond the crushing depths and the impossible pressures, a new world was waiting to be born. He'd spent 12 years afraid of his own power, afraid of what he might become if he stopped holding back. At Marineford, he'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become something others fear. Now, finally, he was ready to see what the world looked like when someone with the power of a Yonko and the heart of a true king decided that freedom was more important than order. The dawn of a new era, he murmured to himself, remembering Neptune's toast from the night before. Behind him, his crew worked with the easy efficiency of people who trusted each other completely. Beside him, Ace stood ready to face whatever came next, the older brother who'd helped him learn that power without compassion was meaningless, but compassion without power was helpless. Ahead of them lay a world that had just declared war on everything they stood for. Bring it on, Luffy said quietly, his golden eyes reflecting the light of the surface far above. Let's show them what freedom looks like. The Thousand Sunny broke through the ocean's surface like a breaching whale, her sails catching the wind as she pointed toward the horizon. Behind her, the depths of Fishman Island fell away into blue darkness. Ahead lay the new world, full of enemies and allies, challenges and opportunities, the endless adventure of reshaping reality itself. And at her bow, Monkey D. Luffy smiled the smile of someone who had finally stopped running from who he was meant to be. The boy who had once declared he would be Pirate King was gone, burned away in the fires of Marineford. In his place stood something new, something the world had never seen before, a man with the power to change everything and the wisdom to use that power responsibly. The age of the world government was ending. The age of true freedom was about to begin. And somewhere in the wind that filled their sails, somewhere in the song of the sea that carried them toward their destiny, the ghost of a blonde boy who had died too young whispered words of pride and encouragement. Well done, brothers, well done. The adventure continued, the end. Man, what a ride! Watching Luffy transform from someone terrified of his own strength into a person willing to reshape the world was incredible. That moment when he finally stops pretending to be weak, chef's kiss what hit you the hardest. Luffy's breakdown after killing Akainu, Ace figuring out his brother had been hiding this power for years. Let me know in the comments. Drop a sub if you want more stories that actually explore the psychological weight of having godlike power at 17. And seriously, suggest your wildest, what-if scenarios. I love diving into these alternate timelines. Catch you in the next one.